Hello and welcome to God Tier Fanfiction. Today I'm gonna continue the series What If Naruto Came Back from Darkness and Guided Konoha Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
I can't. In response, Sasuke snarled, his Sharingan's red flashing with fury. Bullshit. Naruto let out a weary sigh. You have 1 minute and 30 seconds. Konohamaru scowled. When Naruto failed to respond, he growled, so that's it? You're just going to let us leap into the unknown? Answer me, sensei. He shook his head slowly in response. The village wants. Fuck the village. Who cares about them right now? It's about us. Just as Naruto opened his mouth to reply, his eyes briefly widened. A picture of a small boy passed through his head. He was furious. He was unconcerned. Living in this world was meaningless after losing everything he held dear. Nothing to do. Fuck the village. Fuck the elders. Fuck the old man. Fuck them all. The floor was covered in rubbish all around him. He was living in an unoccupied, disorganized flat. He was surrounded by vomit and empty bottles. The outcome of drinking at the age of 8. With trembling hands, he brought a kunai to his throat. His icy blue eyes gazed up at the man who was observing him without emotion. Aren't you going to try and stop me? He yelled. The man gave a shrug. Nope. You're nothing but a coward. So go ahead and do it. I'll tell the police that you slipped. Naruto gave him a snarl. You don't understand, Kakashi. I lost everything. Once more, the man shrugged. Your point? Big whoop, you lost your parents, and blah, blah. Shit happens. Wipe your ass and grow up. Fuck the village, he said as he charged the man while growling like an animal. He hit with his kunai. The yell, "Sensei!" snapped him back to the present. A variety of emotions were visible on each face as they gazed up at him. Kakashi-sensei, I can't do it. Despite his best efforts, he was unable to stop the tears from streaming from his eyes. He looked down through his tears at the sobbing man who was restrained by ropes, his eyes begging for forgiveness. His hands were trembling, causing the blade to rattle. You don't have a choice, Naruto. He turned to face the man when he heard a blade being raised. He exuded waves of raw deadly intent. His Sharingan blazed in the dark. It's either he dies, or you do. Choose. Make a decision. He made his decision. Naruto combed through his hair. He shook his head and looked up at the trees. He knelt to meet each of their eyes and said, fuck it. I might get court-martialed for this, but as you said, Konohamaru, fuck the village. Anbu materialized before he could say anything. Naruto Namikaze, you are in direct violatio. As he was struck with a massive murderous intent, he came to a complete stop. The heavy handle of a sword struck him in the face before he could say another word. After giving the startled trio a wave, the shadow clone picked up the unconscious man and vanished into the trees. He turned back to his startled colleagues and spoke. He met each pair of eyes as he said, listen closely, guys, I only have a minute to speak. You're being asked to kill civilians, maybe innocents, in the name of Konoha. I know how you guys are feeling right now, believe me. But you have to do this if you want to stay on this team. He stopped. You do want to stay on this team, right? They gave a slow nod. Good. The higher-ups believe your generation is not ready for the life of a shinobi. This is a test to see whether or not you have what it takes to obey and go against everything you have been taught. Sakura started, but sensei, we were Taug, Naruto yelled. Do you think they give a fuck what you were taught? He lowered his voice and took a long breath as he saw her wince. He was virtually pleading, saying, listen. Just do it, okay, please. I will be watching, but I can't interfere. If you see other teams, you are not to interact them, neither your teammates. With startled eyes, Sasuke asked, wait, there are others? Naruto gave a nod. They pushed each other forward and gave him a final glance before entering the settlement. Yes, mainly the rookie 9. No go. They exclaimed. He tried to slow his heartbeat by taking deep breaths while running a hand through his hair. With a gust of wind, he vanished, glancing at their vanishing backs. The village leader's office was located in a mid-sized administration village in the middle of the village. Furito Tsuyoshi was smiling as he stood by the window and observed the several residents of Black River inside a tiny office that was stocked with numerous antiques and artworks. He grinned to himself and idly caressed his long white hair. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Despite Konohagakure's best efforts, news of the village murdering members of the One King protesters, a demonstration he had initiated, spread. Konoha would send its dogs racing to the source, just as he had predicted. He had told a few people that Konoha would be looking to kill, and they had made plans in accordance with that. Behind him, 3 figures stood quietly awaiting commands from their lord. Fudo was a big man who scratched his unruly hair while crossing his arms across his chest. The other person in the group idly combed through her shiny black hair. Fuan grinned, already enjoying the opportunity to battle some Konoha nin. The final team member rubbed her hands over the sides of her body while licking her lips sensually. She was eager to give her adversaries a kiss they would die for. The man cleared his throat, drawing their attention to him. He gave the order, "It's time. Go and move into position." Fudo cleared his throat clumsily and scowled at his back. Sir," he said, keeping his gaze fixed on him. "Not to seem disrespectful, but what will you be doing?" Kazuma chuckled loudly and for a long time, frightening the 3 of them. He turned back to the window and said, "My friend, I will be readying our ace in the hole." He concluded with a grim laugh, "These Konoha ninja will never know what hit them." Fuan sneered. "How is that boy going to fight the—" She ducked her head in embarrassment at his intense look. He said angrily, "Do not doubt the power of the Kyuubi." He looked out the window and said, "I will break Sora's seal and let him wreak havoc on these fools. Then, he will lead a path of destruction straight to Konoha." He looked at the lifeless Anbu bodies strewn all around his office. He said in a grim whisper, "This will be the dawn of new era." Hesitantly, the 3 teammates gazed at one another. They moved their feet nervously, eyes darting from one face to another. Konohamaru bravely raised his voice first. "Well, I guess we better get going." Sasuke nodded reluctantly. Yeah." Sakura was looking from one face to another when she shivered, attracting their attention. She threw caution to the wind and threw her arms around them, pressing their faces together until their cheeks touched. Her voice was trembling as she said, "Promise me. And no matter what happens, we'll still be friends." Konohamaru encircled her completely with his arms. Sasuke said, his face taut with emotion, "Of course, Sakura-chan. That's a promise. I promise." Despite their difficult beginnings, they had developed an unbreakable friendship in the brief months they had known one another. She gave them each a tearful grin and gently bumped heads. They nodded to one another and then parted ways, saying, "All right. Good luck." Sasuke looked up at the home where he had paused. He glanced at the paper his target was holding and saw Aiko Noriko, 15 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall. He could tell she was a lovely girl just looking at her photo. Dark black hair and light brown eyes. Her face was attractive, with a tiny nose and high cheekbones. However, her documentation stated that she had no involvement. Innocent. Although she never took part in the One King demonstration, her father was an ardent supporter of it. According to her documentation, she was unaware of the demonstration at all. Her single further worked in the capital city of Fire Country, so she spent much of the day at home by herself. He sighed heavily as he carefully placed the paper in his pouch before approaching the front door and knocking. He soon heard footsteps, and the door was opened by the same person in the photo. Her voice was calm and lovely as she said, "Oh, hello." He glanced at her and saw that she was wearing a form-fitting kimono that concealed a lovely physique. Her long, dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail. He had to cock his head to look at her because she was a few inches taller than him. He was able to smile despite his growing feelings. Before pointing to his headband, he recalled the lie the paper had told them to tell. "Good evening. My name is Sasuke Uchiha and I'm from Konohagakure under a routine village checkup. May I come in?" She gave him a beautiful smile. She opened the door and let him in, saying, "Oh, you're from Konoha? I always wanted to go there. Please come in." With a kunai in his hand, he intervened. She showed him to a small living room and locked the door behind him. He sat elegantly, carefully concealing the blade. "Thank you for inviting me into your home. I know this visit must be unexpected." She grinned as she sat across from him. After a moment of hesitation, she bent her head in his direction and said, "Oh, I don't mind. We rarely see ninja around these parts. So what brings you to this part of Fire Country, Uchiha-san?" "As I mentioned before, routine inspection, and please just call me Sasuke. No need for formalities." Sasuke raised his hand. "I'm just here for checkups on the little things. For example, has your village been subject to crimes lately?" She gave a headshake. Sasuke nodded to himself and tightened his hold on his concealed kunai. "No, most people are friendly out here. Rarely are there any crimes." "What about shinobi presence?" After a moment of contemplation, she shrugged slightly. Once more, Sasuke simply nodded. I see the occasional Konoha shinobi once or twice, but that's it. He prepared to just cut her throat by flexing his arm. But enough of that, I rarely get a chance to talk to a shinobi, and such a cute one for that matter, she said abruptly, causing his mouth to open in disbelief and his hold to loosen. She moved closer to him and put her hands together, appearing even more naive. She asked enthusiastically, "What's it like to be a shinobi? Is life like the ones we see in the movies? Is it all fame and fortune?" Sasuke shut his jaws and stared at her blankly. "Like the movies?" he questioned. She nodded excitedly. "Listen, Oh my god," she said, shaking her head. "How impolite of me not to introduce myself." She extended a hand and said, "I'm Aiko Nariko." She gave him a charming grin and said, "Nice to meet you, Sasuke-kun." "Greetings to you as well," Sasuke said, nodding. "However, I regret to inform you that not a single aspect of a shinobi's life is depicted in the films you see. As I was saying, the life of a shinobi has nothing to do with glamour and fame." He trailed off after realizing she hadn't let go of his hand. She blushed and whispered an apology before swiftly releasing her grip. "As soldiers, we are effectively our Hokage's extensions. Nothing less, nothing more." He recounted what Naruto had said. Rarely, Naruto would sit them down and talk to them about life, specifically the life they had chosen to inherit and the weight of it all. He had to admit that he enjoyed their conversations because the blonde Junin was so perceptive. Every day was like learning a new philosophical lesson. Naruto was direct and blunt, and he took in everything. "Oh my, I never knew that," Aiko said with a startled expression. "I always thought," she said, trying to look embarrassed. "Pardon me, Sasuke-kun. That must have been quite offensive." Sasuke dismissed her apology, wondering why he felt so at ease in her company. Suddenly, the kunai he was holding felt heavy. "So what about you?" he asked, his mouth moving of its own volition. Aiko reddened. "Me? How about me?" she repeated herself. He looked at her without realizing he had pocketed his kunai. "I want to know more about you." The words left his mouth before his brain realized it. "What the fuck?" he raged inside his mind. "Why am I acting like this?" Aiko blushed again absently, twirling her gorgeous dark hair. Her mouth opened, but Sasuke didn't hear it. He swallowed hard, letting his gaze travel lower to run over her black kimono, which perfectly highlighted her generous chest that rose and fell with each breath. When he found her face, he locked eyes with her lovely brown eyes. "Concentrate." The sound of Naruto's voice jolted him out of his reverie. Focus is always key, he thought, recalling his sensei's words and growling inside his head. "Get it the fuck together. Focus, Sasuke." He repeated like a mantra inside his head before taking a deep breath, and his dark gaze found Aiko's flushed face. She could have sworn he was about to kiss her, and in an attempt to ease the awkwardness, she blurted the first thing that came to mind. "Sasuke-kun, would you like something to drink?" How could she be so naive and trusting? Did she have any suspicions at all? Stiffly nodding, Sasuke said, "Yes please. Just do it, Sasuke. Do it and walk away." She grinned before heading into the kitchen, while Sasuke grumbled to himself before running a hand through his hair. With a nod, he got up from the couch and stealthily entered the kitchen, appearing behind her. He palmed his kunai and took a moment to get ready, aiming for the back and straight for the brain in a quick and painless manner. He raised his arm to strike, but he froze at a sound. As she warmed the tea on the stove and mixed the ingredients, she started humming a lovely, angelic tune to herself. After a long day of training, he always loved the sound of his mother humming in the kitchen. Suddenly, instead of Aiko, he saw his mother standing in front of him, dressed in her typical black dress and sporting long, gorgeous dark hair. His arm fell limply to his side. "Concentrate." The word echoed in his mind, but the lull of his mother's voice overpowered the whispers to regain control. Trapped in a trance, he extended his other arm and grasped the silky hair in his fingers as he always did. The phantom image whirled, and his mother gave him a tender look before saying, "Sasuke, stop playing with my hair." "Ah. Sasuke-kun, why are you touching my hair?" Aiko asked, blushing as the image warped. Breaking out of his reverie, he blinked and moved away from her. "Aiko-san. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "No, it's okay, I mean, it's alright if you want to touch it, my hair I mean." Her face turned as red as a tomato. Sasuke-kun, I think you're really cute," she said, biting her lip. "That's why I kinda invited you in," she said, holding up her hands to stop him. "You enjoy nice people." He didn't respond. How could he? She grinned once again and went back to preparing tea. Before long, a warm mug was placed in his hand. Boldly, she put her hand in his and gestured for him to return to the couch. Once seated, she sipped her tea and then looked at him, staring at him for a while before pouting. "Well, will you not give it a try?" She scowled as he robotically raised the mug to his lips and took a drink, which tasted sweet and like honey. "Do you like it?" Sasuke nodded slowly, grinned once more, and started humming softly to herself. Sasuke, meanwhile, gazed at her in awe. How could she be so kind? How could she just be so relaxed? He was there to kill her, and yet she smiled. That damn grin. How could he just sit and stare at that smile? How could he kill her? Just how? Murder. His eyes widened at the whisper in his mind. What had he been training his entire life for? To kill that man. And now he had the audacity to not even kill a single girl. He was filled with rage and bolted from the chair, hurling the mug against the wall, causing Aiko to jump in fear. His breathing became labored as he paced the room, wondering why he couldn't just kill her. Aiko stood up and calmly placed her half-finished tea on a tiny coffee table while her brown eyes watched him move back and forth. She breathed his name softly, Sasuke-kun. She flinched when his fiery red eyes snapped to her. When Sasuke arrived to a large mirror, he halted his furious pacing and stared at his reflection, seeing her image take a tentative step towards him in the background. Sasuke tore his eyes away before continuing to pace, his hands tugging at his hair. Weak. His gaze returned to his mirror, but this time it was not his own image. Instead, Itachi's expression was one of apathy. "Unfortunate. I wasted my time leaving you alive," the image mocked, its look shifting to one of sympathy. "You don't have the hate." He snarled as he punched the glass, shattering the image, slapped his bloody hand against the wall, and pressed his head against the shattered mirror. This should have been simple. He believed that he could simply kill her and move on, like a true genin of Konoha. His thoughts were interrupted by a warm hand resting on his shoulder. "Sasuke-kun." Her cozy voice could be heard. Betrayal made Sasuke's heart hurt. "Aiko-san." He started, I'm not who you think I am." "You're Sasuke Uchiha, aren't you?" she asked with a little smile as her fingers gripped his shoulder more tightly and he slowly turned to face her. "I don't think you could be anyone else," he said, placing a palm on his face. "The last surviving member of the Uchiha clan." Despite his best efforts, he began to shake and his eyes brightened with unshed tears. His Sharingan twirled instinctively, preventing the menacing flow from ever leaving his eyes, and he lowered his sight to the ground while his hand tightened and his knuckles cracked. After a moment of hesitation, she leaned forward and gave him a warm hug, whispering reassuringly as she rubbed circles on his back. Sasuke did not return the embrace, so she tightened her arms around him and filled his nostrils with the vanilla scent of her body. Like his mother, his arms slowly encircled her, betraying him. How could she? Sad. He opened his eyes. "If you can't even take a life, how are you going to kill me?" His trembling body was filled with raw, scorching hatred. "Yes, hate. Let hate give you strength." She was pinned against his chest by his firmly encircling arms. "Come before me when you have the same eyes as mine." Aiko's eyes were wide open in amazement as his arms slammed around her neck, burying her face into his chest. She instinctively pushed against his chest in a fruitless battle, her muffled whimpers filling the empty kitchen as her hands struggled mightily to break free of Sasuke's iron grip. She felt her heaving breaths not providing the oxygen her lungs needed, and her eyes burned with tears. Sharp claws attempted to scratch his face, and Sasuke, unwavering, allowed them to shred his shirt and cut into his flesh as a result of her desperate struggles. Her survival instinct was triggered, and she was doing everything in her power to survive. A battle without hope. Her whimpers were fading, her arms were becoming weaker by the moment, her hands were gripping his arms almost pleadingly, and his shirt was now drenched in tears. "My stupid younger sibling." With a growl, his arms twisted her neck as hatred filled his veins and the primordial drive of the Uchiha, which had been passed down through the ages, invaded his system. Take a snap. Her head had turned completely 180 with a bone sticking out of her neck, and her arms were still receiving messages from her brain as they flailed violently. The sound was deafening and reverberated through the empty kitchen as her corpse fell limply from his hands to its knees. A shrieking, clawing sound that chilled his bones emanated from her neck, and then her body fell lifelessly to the ground, literally hitting the earth face first due to the position of her head. As he looked down at her dying body, Sasuke's form trembled as he let out a quivering breath. Unknowingly, his Sharingan twirled, creating a third tomo. Sharper clarity enveloped his vision, allowing him to witness the last spark of chakra escape from her dead body. His breathing became labored as he fell to his knees in front of her. I didn't mean to. He had been enraged by his brother's whispers and had never intended to kill her so brutally and violently. A wet substance struck his hand, and when he looked down, he saw a speck of water slowly trickling down his fingers. His hand then slowly moved to his face, wiping away the tears he didn't even feel, beginning to fall. It had been so long since he had cried that it almost seemed strange to him to go so long without feeling this emotion. A hand landed on his shoulder. The floodgates opened as tears finally started to stream, and he didn't even notice when his face found his sensei's green vest or feel the embrace that enveloped him. He looked up at the gloved hand and then up towards Naruto's understanding face. Naruto muttered, "It's okay, Sasuke." His shaking arms tightened around his sensei as he let out the feelings he had been holding within for so long. He shuddered, then let out a betraying moan, and soon his last constraints were broken as his cries filled the quiet kitchen. Glancing over Sasuke's dark hair at the girl's body, Naruto grimaced. The girl's body was brutal. He shuddered inwardly at the thought that this was only the first kill. His other genin still had their targets. He looked down at Sasuke, his whimpers resonating through the empty house. If things were already this bad, he grimaced to think what his other genin would go through. Sakura, who had been roaming aimlessly for over an hour in pursuit of her destination, sneezed as a shiver went through her body and threw her arms around herself, scratching at her bare arms in a futile attempt to warm herself from the chilling breeze that suddenly began to blow. She scowled as she looked at her photo. Takashi Sato was a dark-haired boy with large green eyes. According to his file, his father was also employed in the village's salmon industry, but he typically worked late hours. His mother was one of the workers who had been poisoning the fish and shipping it to Konoha. Takashi was just 8 years old. Her feet took her to the village's large docks because the Sato family's home was supposedly a waterhouse on the river. As she crossed the unsteady piers, she noticed water homes floating steadily in the water all around her, each with a boat docked in the river next to it. While looking for the particular home, she was briefly distracted by the sound of children. A group of lads ran by the girl with the pink hair, racing across the piers before jumping in a neighboring boat, their laughing and cries resonating across the still docks. Curious, she followed her feet to the boat, which was a big canoe painted with ivy leaf motifs. When she approached the canoe, 5 inquisitive eyes met hers, and she waved a hand awkwardly while grinning. "Well, hello. Are any of you familiar with Takashi Sato?" "Oh, why lookin' for Taka baby," said a boy with blonde hair, nodding his head. "He hangs by Dotic Edge makin' his toys." The lads all laughed at his mocking tone. What a loser. She frowned, nodded silently, and carried on walking across the piers. It was clear that those youngsters were bullies, which exacerbated the already dire situation. The child was being tormented and wasn't even particularly liked. She noticed a little guy sitting with his feet hanging over the piers and working on something in his hands, and when her feet got close enough to see him, he peered over his shoulder and scowled at her, making sure her footfall were audible. His face was round and covered in freckles, and he had red hair. She stopped right next to him and smiled slightly, saying, "Hi there." Takashi scowled before going back to the items he was holding. She halted as she moved closer to look over his shoulder at the item, which was a beautifully crafted wooden boat with leaf patterns and a small metal mass attached. She questioned, "Did you make that yourself?" "Yeah." He looked away shyly, pausing his small knife chipping to stare up at her. "Are you here to make fun of me like the others?" he asked. She grinned at the boy as she sat next to him. "That's a really nice boat. No, I'm not here to make fun of you. I'm just here to kill you." He gave her a tentative smile and said, "You truly think so? All the other kids call me weird and stuff for making these," he remarked shyly. Sakura crossed her arms and sighed, saying, "Well, those youngsters are dumb." The small child grinned and showed her a row of missing teeth. "Thanks." He said. "You have an amazing talent." "I'm Takashi, soon-to-be super awesome boat builder, and it's nice to meet you, Sakura-chan," she said, raising her eyebrows as the young boy extended a plump hand and shaking it with a smile. This young child in front of her was full of hopes and plans for the future. He hadn't even begun life yet he was already destined to die, and she smiled the meticulously perfected expression she had been working on since the beginning of this exam. "Sakura-chan, would you like to be my friend?" The girl was taken aback by the question before her eyes started to burn with unshed tears. She smiled bravely and agreed, causing the small boy to yell with delight as he suddenly sprang up, revealing his ripped green overalls and worn-out boots. "I must invite you to my home, Sakura-chan, so hurry up." Sakura shook her head in panic, saying, "No, I'm sorry, Takashi, but I'm going to have to refuse. Since no one was around and they were on the docks, she could conceal the body by using the flowing river. It would be simple to kill. She ignored the cautions in her mind and gave him a little grin before saying, "Fine, I'll come with you." However, when she saw his broken face, her determination faltered. Sakura almost stumbled as she tried to keep up with the tiny boy's speed. How could such a small guy run so fast? Takashi's mood completely changed as he let out another yell of excitement, helped her to her feet, grabbed her hand, and started sprinting down the street. As they slowed down, they came upon a little waterfront house that appeared to have seen better days. The young lad took out a key, unlocked the door, and invited her inside. "I'm home, Pops," he declared. Sakura's eyes grew wide. His father was supposed to be working late, and only his mother was supposed to be at home. It's funny that she never heard Takashi mention her name, unlike his father. The young boy's response was a grunt, and then footsteps emerged from a tiny living room, revealing a rough-looking man who was casually picking at his thick goatee. Sakura had to suppress a gag because of the man's overpowering alcohol odor. Before pointing a finger at the kunoichi, the inebriated took a shot from the bottle he was holding. "Who is this girl?" He took a quick look at her unusual pink hair. "Are you a whore?" Takashi's face flushed with shame. He turned to the frowning girl and gave her a sheepish smile, saying, "Dad. This is my new friend Sakura-chan." "Sorry about that. This my dad, Akashi." Sakura only nodded in greeting, staring at the father who shared his son's features but lacked freckles. As he took another sip of booze, Akashi casually rubbed at a stain on his black overalls. With a loud, impolite burp, he turned on his heel and walked into the living room. He sighed and reclined in an armchair in front of an antique-looking television, saying, "Peef, whatever." Takashi pulled at her hand. "Come on Sakura-chan, I'll show you my room." Their home was incredibly tiny. As Sakura passed the living room, she noticed a tiny table and refrigerator at the other end, indicating that their living room doubled as their kitchen. They arrived at Takashi's room in a matter of steps. Sakura's jaw dropped open as soon as he took her inside. Numerous wooden boat designs of all sizes cluttered his room. Some had ropes and sails, and they were a step higher than the one she had seen. Some even had tiny metal guns. Before her green eyes came upon his beaming face, they gazed about the room in awe. His smile became sardonic as he said, "Pretty neat, eh? This here is my sanctuary. Those stupid bullies can't reach me here." Sakura nodded before tears began to hurt her. How could she murder this little boy? He was so young, so full of life, and so full of potential. Her determination crumbled as she stared into his innocent dark eyes, and she let out a sob. She clamped a hand over her mouth in an unsuccessful attempt to stifle the sound. Takashi became alarmed at witnessing her expression. "Sakura-chan, are you okay? What's wrong?" the tiny boy said, pulling at the hem of her red dress before encircling her with his small figure. "Don't cry, Sakura-chan. My mommy always used to say a hug could cure tears." She mustered a tearful grin in spite of her boiling emotions. After taking a few moments to gather herself, she gave the small boy a grateful grin before scowling. "Your mommy sounds like a good person. Where is your mother, by the way, Takashi?" After releasing himself from her, the tiny child moved in the direction of one of his exquisite drawings. He said, "She died, a few weeks ago." He took out a photo of a stunning woman with black hair from the pockets of his overalls. She was poisoned. He was facing away from her. It was either now or never. Sakura silently withdrew kunai from her trembling hands while gazing at his back. She had to pass this test in order to remain on Team 7. Listen, she had to. All right, just do it. Please. Her mind replayed Naruto's voice. Her expression changed to one of resolve, and she silently advanced until she was behind the child. With her kunai aimed at his neck, she held it forward. "You will commit murder, theft, rape, bribery, intimidation, seduction, torture, and a host of other crimes." With her kunai poised and prepared to strike, she withdrew her hand. "Well, in Konoha's honor." With tears in his eyes, the child turned back and froze as he saw the knife she was holding. Sakura-chan, what are you doing?" Sakura bit back a sob as her eyes filled with tears. "Forgive me, Takashi." An angry Akashi stormed into the room as the door blew open before her kunai could hit it. The red-eyed man growled at Sakura, causing her to freeze. "Konoha slut." Sakura was knocked to the ground by the man's bottle smashing over her head before she could react. He straddled her waist, pinning her with his weight while using the broken bottle as a makeshift knife. He lifted the bottle, ready to pierce her throat with it. "No, stop, Dad. Kakashi stunned his father by smashing the little boat he carried in his pocket over his head. He kept striking until the man had to drop the shattered bottle and shield his head with his hands. After getting better, he lifted his elbow and struck Takashi in the face, rendering the small child unconscious. He gritted his teeth and softened his gaze for a time before glaring down at the astonished Sakura with an angry expression. He put his arms around her throat out of retaliation. Sakura frantically attempted to shove the man away from her by using her arms, but he pinned her arms down with his knees. His eyes went insane as he spat in her face, saying, "Furito-sama was right. Konoha would send the dogs. Lucky me I got a bitch." Sakura used all of her effort to intensify her struggles, but the big man's weight kept her trapped. She held one hand around her throat while the other started to slowly move down her body. His mad smile grew predatory as he dropped his face to hers, fanning her tearful cheeks with his boozy breath. "Konoha slut. By the time I'm finished with you, you'll be begging for death. I'm going to handle you right." Sakura screamed, desperately attempting to free herself from this man. Akashi laughed mockingly. "I love it when they scream," he cried out in agony as the shattered bottle he had fallen pierced his shoulder. Takashi leapt on his own father and delivered punches to his head with his tiny arms. "Get off her! Sakura-chan is my friend." The young lad fell limply to the ground, his head hitting the ground with a hollow thump, after Akashi struck him broadly with his elbow, smacking his nose with such force that a terrible crack was audible. With a ragged breath, Akashi reached up and roughly removed the shattered bottle that was lodged in his shoulder. He winced at the shattered glass. He looked at his son, shuddering in agony, and saw a trail of blood coming from his nose, swiftly creating a pool of blood all around him. With regret, he shook his head. In any case, he never loved the boy. His eyes returned to Sakura, who was staring at the motionless Takashi, and he sneered at her horrified expression. "See what you made me do. Bitch, I fucking killed my own son. You fucking Konoha whore ack." The man was rolled over and pinned beneath the enraged Kunoichi, and Sakura's growl chilled him. Takashi's prompt action had given her the opportunity to release her arms and transfer chakra to her muscles. The screaming Akashi was struck by the kunai she was holding. "Wait, please, why?" The knife repeatedly crashed into his neck after piercing his throat before being drawn back. The flaring arms that had attempted to free the tiny girl fell limp to the floor. Even after the victim stopped moving, Sakura continued to stab him. His blood splashed up on her face due to the power of her movements, soaking her face and hair with the crimson liquid. Her eyes were actually red with anger as she carried on with her movements. Slick, 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 slick. A gloved hand stopped her next blow. She instinctively reached out with her other hand, but the blow was stopped as quickly as the last one. Her green eyes fixed on Naruto's expressionless face as he gazed at her and then carefully took the bloodied kunai from her hands. Sakura's breathing was harsh, and she gave Naruto a bewildered look before her eyes widened and she looked at the figure she was straddling. She puked all over the floor, so Naruto had to hurriedly get her hair out of the way. With one hand, he held her hair back, and with the other, he patted her back to lessen the violent coughs that made her retch. It took all of his training not to flinch at the sight of the body in front of the girl as his lone eye concentrated on it. Akashi's face was unrecognizable. His face was ripped open in the middle, revealing chunks, fragments of his brain that had been mashed, and a few bits of his severely damaged jaw. Sakura's retching caused his jaw, which was hanging off the side of his mouth, to shift phantom-like. His gaze was drawn to fragments of white, which Naruto could only assume were the remnants of the man's eyes scattered around the space. On the wall, a fragment of his nose was crushed. He ushered Sakura to her feet after sensing that she had finally finished throwing up, then winced as she threw herself into his arms. Naruto gave the girl a comforting hug as her body shook with tears and her cries filled the quiet room. "Sensei." She sniffed. She let out another sob and drifted off. He tried to. She didn't have to explain anything to Naruto. Shivering with anger at the man he had been observing. Even though Sakura was instructed not to step in under any circumstances, Akashi would have been beheaded a few seconds later if Sakura hadn't turned things around. Naruto pressed his face into the girl's hair and tightened his arms around her, not caring that his mask was covered with blood. He muttered, "Shush, Sakura." In order to give the girl a chance to release her tension, he settled himself by massaging reassuring circles into her back. Before the girl fainted in his arms from the emotional strain, her tears quickly stopped. Naruto repositioned the girl in his arms, holding her against his chest with one hand beneath her leg and the other beneath her back. He stared blankly at the lifeless Akashi before turning to look at the young boy across the room. His voice echoed across the silent room as he gazed at the scene. It wasn't a plea to come out before the Black Ops member stealthily moved to stand in front of Naruto, and Anbu melted out of a shadowy corner of the room. Naruto narrowed his eyes and said, "The girl still has to kill her target," but as the Anbu member reached up and took off his mask, his attitude altered. "But for you, Naruto-senpai, she passed nonetheless." Naruto said, "Tenzo, I'm surprised to see your face here." Tenzo gave a welcoming bow before a smirk appeared on his face. "It's been a while, Naruto-senpai. I must say you scared some Anbu by the show you made at the village entrance." Naruto smiled. "But I must also inform you that I go by the name Yamato these days." Naruto sneered. He concluded, grinning, "Whatever name you go by, you'll still be my underling." Yamato scowled at that. His eyes furrowed as he said, "Yes, senpai, I haven't forgot the days you bullied me. You still do." Naruto chuckled. Yamato stroked his temples wearily, recalling the days he had first met Naruto. "Hush, you were always too fun to pick on." Even though Kakashi had been awful, Naruto had made his life terrible every minute of the day while he was in his team. Every day. He was pulled back to the present by Naruto's voice. "Anyways, Yamato, is that boy still alive?" He approached the youngster in silence and touched his pulse with his fingertips. He gave a nod. "He's still alive, senpai, but it seems he'll soon choke to death from the blood." In fact, there was a tiny puddle surrounding him as the blood slowly trickled into his mouth from his nose. With a groan, Naruto started to say something, but Yamato cut him off. He pulled out his sword and said, "Don't worry, senpai. I'll make it quick and painless." With a nod of gratitude, Naruto vanished with Sakura in a body flicker, leaving Yamato with the tiny child. He gave the young Takashi a sly smile before his expression went blank. The boy had made an effort to keep her safe. How unfortunate. There was a squish and his sword flashed. Scratching his head at the direction he was providing, Konohamaru strolled through the settlement. He sighed in exasperation, never one for instructions, and surveyed the settlement as the sky grew gloomy. Yes. He had no idea where he was. He displayed the photo of his target, a boy roughly his age with piercing black eyes and short dark blue hair. Sora was reportedly an orphan who served as a courier for the local chief. Well, these two were incredibly close, according to the text. His eyes widened as four enormous gates appeared from around the settlement, interrupting his reading as he felt the ground start to tremble. He blinked as a purple barrier developed around the settlement and then solidified with an ethereal glow while gazing in awe at the massive structures. Before he could express his shock at what he saw, a running child pushed him over and sent him flying to the ground. He tried to stop his head from spinning while groaning and pushing himself upright. A hand was forced into his face, and he embraced it with gratitude. The stranger promptly said, "I'm sorry," and assisted him in standing. After getting up and brushing himself off, Konohamaru froze at the boy who had collided with him. Konohamaru dropped the paper, but Sora caught it up and held it toward him with a courteous smile. He trailed off after noticing Konohamaru's headband and then looked at the paper he was holding. "My apologies, I was in a rush and..." The boy flung the paper in Konohamaru's face and fled down the street as he attempted to seize him. Konohamaru cursed at his lack of decisiveness. The two boys were the only ones running down the street. Konohamaru threw a kunai, but the Sora's triple-bladed claw stopped him. After that, Sora launched another assault, swiping his palm through the air and applying chakra to his hand. Palm-tearing beast. A fierce gust of wind swept directly toward Konohamaru. He slapped his palms to the ground and flashed hand seals while cursing. Mud wall. Earth release. With the exception of the small line that ran across it, a wall of dirt rose up to prevent the jagged wind onslaught. Sora used the transient earth wall to fuel his next move while grinning at his opponent's action. He shouted as a demonic claw-like hand extended and broke through the earth wall while he focused his chakra. Gale palm. Beast tearing. Behind the wall, Konohamaru collapsed to the ground before vanishing into a cloud of smoke. With wide eyes, Sora turned in time to be struck in the face, sending him hurtling through the air before he hit the ground. Using his momentum, he rolled to his feet, wincing. He thought to himself, "Damn, that guy hits hard." He growled at the young Sarutobi after spitting forth some blood. "Piece of shit, Konoha nin. You screwed yourself the moment you stepped into this village." With his claw ready to attack, he launched himself forward at tremendous speed while concentrating his chakra. With another kunai in hand, Konohamaru confronted the furious lad and skillfully deflected his ferocious blows. Sora growled as the lad danced around him, his movements quick, returning each blow he deflected with a kunai slice. Sora shouted as he struck out with a broad arc of his claw, gritting his teeth as a slice wounded his arm. However, his wrist snagged his arm before his slash could make contact, and his claws stopped only inches from Konohamaru's shoulder. The angry boy grabbed the genin's arm and held it while he smacked him in the stomach with his kunai. The two engaged in a struggle for dominance as they attempted to subdue one another. With the exception of his eye narrowing as he pushed chakra to his limbs and his kunai started to move closer to the boy's midsection, Konohamaru's face was expressionless. Sora growled as chakra sprang from his body at the icy sensation of metal piercing his stomach. In order to avoid being sliced by the wind chakra that emanated from his form, Konohamaru had to suppress a wince as he retreated from the youngster. Sora grinned as he extended the chakra's reach by focusing it on his triple blade claw. He yelled as he charged Konohamaru, who once more flashed through hand seals and spat out a cloud of smoke that blocked Sora's eyesight. The youngster screamed as the cloud of smoke exploded, lighting him on fire, and heard the click of teeth before he could blow the smoke away. Konohamaru observed the small boy's screams of being roasted alive with indifference. He had seen death before. He looked around to see if anyone would flee at the sound of Sora's cry, but the street remained strangely empty. He frowned and returned his focus to the youngster after hearing his cry fade as the fire eventually went out. With a kunai in his hand, he approached the still youngster gently before stopping when he got close. With the exception of his pants, the boy's black clothing was entirely charred off his body. His nostrils tingled from the stench of scorched flesh, and his skin was black and charred. Sora's body did not react when he nudged him with his foot. He twirled his kunai and held it down, ready to strike, but he halted at the red eyes that suddenly opened. He struck down as hard as he could since he didn't want to make the same mistake again, but the crimson chakra eruption from the burned youngster blew him back. Skin healing quickly, Sora screamed in agony as his burns healed in front of Konohamaru's shocked gaze. The chakra surrounding Sora condensed into the shape of a fox-eared tail after bubbling to form a chakra cloak. Konohamaru muttered, What? This chakra? How? How was the Kyuubi's chakra obtained by this boy? Was he also a Jinchuriki? A sinister, familiar voice echoed in his mind, stopping his thoughts. Murder him. As red chakra started to build around him, Konohamaru clutched his head in agony. Destroy him. No, fuck off, he yelled, his body aching. Eat this imposter. Like Sora, the red chakra bubbled and condensed into the shape of a tail with fox ears, and he let out a cry of agony as a chakra shroud enveloped him. Kill him. No. Konohamaru roared wildly as the Kyuubi's chakra overwhelmed him. He dropped to all fours and growled at Sora, who followed suit and then charged the Jinchuriki. Konohamaru was hit by his blow, but the Jinchuriki, who returned the blow threefold, was barely stunned. His punch was so powerful that Sora's red form was propelled through buildings, leaving a path of devastation, while a wave raced through the air after impact. Before pursuing the fictitious container, Konohamaru let out another roar and produced a second tail. For teams that took SD, a sizable tent was set up outside the settlement, acting as a means of recuperation for teams that had either succeeded or failed. The council members were occupied with their task, conversing with the few who had lost their minds due to the intense pressure of the exam. Before turning his attention back to his own side, Asuma cast a pitying glance at the yelling genin. He sighed and said, Thank Kami that none of you broke. Fortunately, his team had succeeded in locating and destroying their targets before the allotted time. None of the three responded to him. They had no desire to. His eyes met Shikamaru's as the youngster calmly awaited his response. Is this what it truly means to be a shinobi, Asuma-sensei? He said. Asuma sighed and puffed on his cigarette, then scratched his beard. He responded to the young genius, a shinobi is one who endures. Self-sacrifice is the way of the shinobi. Shikamaru nodded, then glanced at Ino, who was sobbing and using Choji's shirt as a tissue. The child Amichiki seems to have experienced a terrible ordeal. The burning tears stopped as he clenched his teeth. Nothing would be the same after today. With a little shake of his head, Asuma looked at the teams who had suffered. He gave Kurenai a pitying glance as she stood with tears streaming down her cheeks, surrounded by her two genin, as Hinata screamed and chanted uncontrollably while the medics medicated her. She was among the unfortunate genin who had snapped. Kurenai was heartbroken. Her other genin had succeeded in eliminating their targets. Technically, Hinata passed since she killed her target. He was aware that Kurenai had assisted, but the little girl's mental state collapsed. He looked around to see how the other teams were catching the few teams that had made it through, while her companions sat expressionless, Guy was with his team comforting a sobbing female student, whose name he couldn't recall. Aobo, who appeared to have won the lotto, caught his eye and grinned. Somehow, his team had passed with honors. The fact that Aobo's team passed Konoha's SD but failed the Chunin examinations, which would have been their 9th attempt, amused Asuma. He has a peculiar child named Kabuto. He turned to see Naruto observing the two members of his team comfort each other after Blonde drew his attention. He had heard that they both ruthlessly murdered their victims. He approached Naruto and stood calmly next to him before giving the two a nod. "Where's Konohamaru?" It took Naruto a few moments to respond. He simply gazed at the teammates who were crying in silence and giving each other hugs. "He's still out there. The real me is trying to locate him." Asuma gave the clone a nod before taking a drag from his cigarette. "Do you think he'll pass?" Naruto asked, grinning before giving a little shake of his head. He stopped off and stiffened. "It's Konohamaru we're talking about here, that boy." Asuma scowled at him, keeping an eye out for any indications of peril. "What is it? What's wrong?" He stopped as well, sensing it. Before long, a terrible chakra wave swept over everyone in the tent, making them nervous. The chakra of Kyuubi. Naruto barked commands in response right away. He said, "Counselors and genin remain here. Anbu guards remain at your post. All Junin sensei who can follow, come with me." The blonde struggled to keep up with the Junin as he rushed off, and everyone just nodded. With a heart-pounding pace, they dashed out of the tent through the thick forest. They emerged from a clearing in front of the village after hearing the well-known sound of flowing water for a little while. However, the ground began to tremble and a massive gate appeared in front of the gathered shinobi, forcing them to stop before they could approach the settlement. "What the hell is that?" Before anybody could react, the ground began to tremble, and they could see 3 other enormous gates like the one in front of them rising out of the earth in the distance. Naruto's eyes widened as he saw where they were. They were located in the village's north, south, east, and west sections. He said, "This is a barrier gate 5 seals technique," and the gathered ninja mumbled in disbelief. Asuma scowled at him. "What's that?" He shouted, "It's a barrier technique to prevent no wait," but one of the Junin who was approaching the settlement didn't hear him. The man was unable to stop himself in time as a purple dome barrier developed over the settlement before he could even approach. His screams were chilling to the bone as he was burned alive as soon as he touched the barrier. Someone promptly put out the flames using a water jutsu. A woman with dark hair hurried over to him and ran green, glowing hands over his scorched body. She stopped her jutsu, sighed, and shook her head as she looked up sorrowfully at the gathering. As the gathered group started cursing, Naruto sighed. "What the fuck? So now no one can either enter or leave." Some genin are still in there. Lifting his headband, Naruto revealed his Sharingan eye. Before lightning struck his fist and birds began to chirp, he moved in the direction of the barrier. Rakery. The barrier only gave a pulse when his strike hit. His arm was covered with burns, so he had to hiss and pull it back. He stopped the medic with a hand as she hurried to assist him right away. He turned to face the group and said, "Don't bother, I'm just a shadow clone." He received nods of assent before joining the group and flashing through hand seals. "Everyone, let's try and hit this barrier at a single point with some jutsu." Fireball jutsu. Fire release dragon flame bomb. Fire release. Rushing wave of water release jet pistol. Water release. Vacuum wave wind release vacuum sphere for wind release. Electric judgment. Lightning release shock bolt for lightning release. Rock wave. Earth release. As each shinobi overloaded their jutsu with chakra, jutsu poured down on the barrier. They cut off the chakra flow to their assaults after a short while, gasping from the energy expenditure. The barrier was unharmed by their assaults when the smoke cleared. Their faces instantly became frustrated at the pointless attempt. What was the strength of the barrier? Asuma wiped away a trail of perspiration after taking a minute to gather his thoughts. He growled, "Well, that was a waste." In the meantime, Naruto ran a hand through his hair before tensing up once more as his chakra started to drastically fluctuate. His eyes widened in fear. He was certain that he only sensed 2 Kyuubi chakra sources. Sensing the seriousness of the situation, he took a deep breath and attracted the attention of people around him before clenching his hands and becoming motionless. Junin gazed at his still figure in confusion. Aobo moved to stand next to Asuma and spoke softly in his ear. Asuma only shrugged when asked, Asuma-san. What's he doing? I have no clue." Naruto's focus wavered as he sensed 3 formidable signatures approaching. He leapt from his old position just in time to avoid the ground that suddenly opened up. "Everyone get back," he exclaimed. 3 people, unaffected by the barrier's touch, emerged from it and grinned at the gathered shinobi. A big man with purple facial tattoos flexed his arm while continuously smiling. Oh man, there sure is a lot of them. A haughty woman with dark hair grinned. I hope they're worthy of a challenge. In agreement, a stunning redhead licked her lips sensually. Her blue eyes widened and then narrowed hungrily on Naruto's figure as she caught his gaze. I can't wait to give them a kiss to die for. She gave him a kiss and grinned as he waved back, then hissed at Kurenai's elbow. He shook his head to get rid of his perverse ideas. Damn, she's hot, and look at that body. Flirting with the adversary was not appropriate at this time. However, it was much more difficult to repress the inner pervert when she rubbed her hands sensually over her body. Before a hand grabbed him by the shoulder, he drew his sword and pumped chakra through the blade to lengthen it to its typical length. He raised an eyebrow as he looked into Asuma's steel eyes. He turned to face the others and said, "We got this, Naruto." The group nodded and then split off, leaving Kurenai and Guy behind. Guy and Kurenai, you stay with me. The rest of you go and find a way to get through this barrier. Naruto scowled. You sure? He asked, turning to face the opposing shinobi. From the feel of their chakra, they're powerful. Guy nodded to him. Fear not, Naruto-kun. Our flames of youth shall burn these enemies blocking our path. Kurenai shook her head at Guy's antics, then met his flaming gaze. You're just a clone. One hit and you'd be gone anyway. Naruto scowled as he marched up into her face upon hearing the dismissal in her voice. Kurenai lowered her foot gently, and he said, Now look here, Kurenai. If you weren't so hot I would act, while clutching his groin. At the disappearance, Fuka pouted. She shook her head and said, Ah, the yellow fang disappeared. Her friends rolled their eyes at her blatant flirting, saying, he was such a hottie. When it came to guys she thought were interesting, the redhead had no shame. Fuin scowled at her and said, Focus. Fuka responded by sticking her tongue out at her. These three are not like the rest that ran with their tail between their legs. Fudo simply growled in exasperation. Whatever bitches, I just want to kill some tree huggers. Guy scowled at the big man and said, I'll take the brute. Asuma instantly replied, observing the way she licked her lips, I'll take the redhead. Kurenai slapped him across the head and then scowled at the last female, causing him to yell. I'll have the last member. Sora's body was forcefully smashed into the earth. The might of the real Jinchuriki was gradually overwhelming his chakra cloak, which was struggling to shield him from the blows he was taking. He attempted to summon more red chakra to strengthen his form, but Konohamaru rapidly absorbed it and his punches grew more powerful. The Jinchuriki was gradually defeating the imposter, and a third tail had already developed. They were in the middle of the settlement, surrounded by a sizable crater caused by the intensity of their conflict. It had been blatantly biased. Sora felt the last of his chakra leave him and coughed up blood. Who would have thought that he would run into the real Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi? He responded by slamming his fist into the ground until his jaw broke from the impact. Konohamaru ruthlessly resumed his massive blows, causing the hole that had created beneath Sora's body to widen with each blow. A golden chain of chakra wrapped around his arms, stopping him before he could execute a final blow by intertwining his hands and raising them above his head. The chain appeared to be emanating from his sensei's arm as Konohamaru's savage eyes traced its source. Using his Sharingan, Naruto narrowed his eyes at Konohamaru's chakra cloak before his mix match discovered the Kyuubi's fiery crimson. Naruto started out slowly. Konohamaru. Are you in control? He asked as he approached the angry Jinchuriki carefully, being careful not to move too quickly. Konohamaru's fiery eyes briefly lost their ferocious appearance after blinking. S-sensei. Naruto continued to move slowly while nodding in acknowledgement. Yes. Using this as a cue, his chain glowed brightly before gradually suppressing the Kyuubi's chakra. He briefly looked at the boy who was unconscious beneath him before returning his attention to Konohamaru. For the time being, he was more concerned with calming the Jinchuriki than actually suppressing the chakra, which would need the employment of additional chains. Konohamaru gave a little growl and held his head in agony. Sensei, it hurts. It hurts so much. Another golden chain sprang from Naruto's wrist as he stretched his other arm. It then gently traveled to the Jinchuriki, swaying like a snake, and wrapped around one of the chakra tails. Naruto was starting to perspire with concentration. Okay, Konohamaru. Before they advanced and caught the child Jinchuriki, two more chains appeared from his back and said, I'm going to make the pain go away. Naruto moved swiftly, clapping his fists together and directing his energy toward the chains. Suppress. The gushing crimson chakra started to be suppressed as his other chains emitted a dazzling brilliance similar to the first. As the chakra started to gradually recede, Konohamaru did nothing but groan in agony. His eyes widened and he strained as his clone's memories came back to him. Naruto shook his head, putting Kurenai's spanking off until later. Naruto twirled his Sharingan, taking in Konohamaru's tightly coiled body and the numerous veins covering it. He was hurting so terribly. However, why? The seal was in fine condition. His father's ultimate brilliance allowed the Kyuubi's chakra to gradually blend with Konohamaru's. However, Naruto realized something wasn't right as he let out a cry of agony. It appeared to be wind release. Shakuho Twister. Naruto turned to look to his right just in time to see a massive windstorm hurtling in his direction. With a curse, he stopped the chakra flow to his shackles and leapt barely in time to dodge the twister as it charged after him. The strong wind attack shattered the chains into fragments. As he landed, the shattered chains that were still attached to his body gradually faded and appeared to be absorbed back into his body. His scowl shifted to a figure approaching him casually. Furito, dressed in combat attire, twirled the Shakuho stick he had used to launch his strike while grinning at him. Kazumu said in a smug tone, "I can see that speed of yours is not just a rumor, Yellow Fang." The man laughed when Naruto narrowed his eyes and said, "You're Furito Tsuyoshi." Furito wiped a tear from his eye and then shot Naruto a derisive glance. "You Konoha shinobi. The lot of you are so pathetic I almost pity you." Naruto pulled out his sword. "Imagine that, the leader of the One King protest, appears before me. You saved me the trouble of looking for you." Furito laughed. "I go by the name Kazuma, my dear boy. I'll make sure to tell your Hokage his spies are pathetic as I pierce his heart." "So you knew the entire time?" Naruto looked up at the purple barrier, his Sharingan glowing a terrifying red in awareness. "And you set a trap, patiently waiting for us to arrive." Kazuma had a smug expression. "But of course, did you think word would not get out about this, SD? And to think the daimyo himself would condone Konoha's actions?" He smiled. "Guess I'll have to kill him as well." After blinking at him, Naruto flipped his sword and used it as a temporary cane. "Mind telling me what this protest is all about? Sounds to me like your butt hurt over Konoha." His smile turned into a snarl. "You serve under a king so corrupt that you are blinded by the fact that Konohagakure has become rotten to the core. Your leaders brainwash you with notion of the will of fire. That's nothing more than a false ideology used to make you sacrifice your lives for the village that treats you as nothing more than expendable. A carefully crafted lie over the notion of the greater good." He gave a headshake. He threw open his arms and said, "Konoha has become a plague, a cancer to the land of fire. The cure to such a disease is the one true king. There can only be one. The daimyo." With a deranged expression on his face. "I will end the reign of this false king and unite the land of fire under one ruler, one absolute power. I will become king and lead this nation to glory." He gestured to Sora. "That boy is the key to absolute salvation. I will use him to tear a path of destruction straight to Konohagakure and erase it off the face of this earth. I will destroy Konoha." Naruto had silently listened to his entire tirade without saying anything, his expression remaining expressionless. The man sighed when he seemed to be done. He shook his head, saying, "Megalomaniacs." He was getting ready for battle, easing his blade straight, when he heard Konohamaru's yell. The chakra cloak was rapidly reforming as the chakra of the nine tails started to act up. Naruto thought to himself, "Shit, I need to wrap this up quickly." In response, he said, "Magnificent. That's the real Kyuubi Jinchuriki, isn't it?" Naruto appeared next to him with his blade ready to cut him in half. Kazuma parried the blow with his staff and then leapt back to get some space. When he saw the chip produced by the blade, he scowled at his staff. It should have been strong enough to withstand any blade because he was using chakra to enforce it. When he saw the blade in Naruto's hands, his eyes grew wide. Naruto's sole response to Kazuma's question, "That's the grasscutter sword. How did you come to possess it?" was to point the sword at him. The blade extended so quickly that Kazuma only had time to parry it, wincing as the friction of the sword inflicted a deeper chip into his staff. Curse the sharpness of the blade. Suddenly, Naruto was in front of him once more, his fist crackling with lightning as he sprang forward. Before the victim started to turn to mud, the attack went straight through his heart. Naruto scowled at the clone before witnessing the real Kazuma go for his dropped sword. All Naruto had to do was wait for the man to approach closely enough before raising his hand, which caused the blade to lift and float in his direction. He saw the man's shocked expression and caught the sword. He used his sword to blitz the man, sending sparks flying as metal struck metal. The strong blows sent shivers down Kazuma's arms, and all he could do was block. At this pace. Twop. Naruto delivered a strong blow that split his staff in two, and then he kicked the man, sending him sprawling to the ground. Kazuma screamed as his arm was impaled to the ground before he could even halt. He looked up at Naruto's cold eyes after staring at the blade piercing his wrist with wide eyes. He reached for his three-bladed claw, wincing through the agony, only to discover that Naruto's heel had pinned his other arm. With icy eyes, Naruto extended his arm and concentrated his chakra while lightning covered it. Without any delay, Naruto extended his hand with the intention of puncturing his. Stop. Reikiri's blade stopped just millimeters from Kazuma's face. The onslaught was so near that the heat from the sparks started to burn his mouth and nose. Naruto pulled his arm back, but he didn't stop the chakra from flowing to it. His eyes strayed to Sora's beseeching eyes and the frantic voice. As he frantically attempted to crawl in their direction, his arm was shattered and his face was severely wounded. Konohamaru was growling behind him as the chakra kept expanding quickly. Tears streamed down the boy's cheeks as he carried on with his desperate journey in spite of his suffering. Please, don't kill him, he's all I have left. Before a realization hit, Naruto's Sharingan shifted from one face to the other. He scowled and pointed his lighting sword at the man, focusing on his face. Oh, you're the boy's father. Why'd I sense the Kyuubi's chakra coming from that boy? Last time I checked there was only one Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Kazuma didn't care that he was only a few centimeters away from death. He just grinned. His eyes became defiant as he said, their many was to harness the power of a tailed beast. Your father turned the genin into a Jinchuriki. Funny how he wasn't man enough to use his own son. A fist coated in lightning pierced the man's head before he could blink. Dust and other debris flew through the air as a result of the attack's ferocity, which triggered an explosion upon collision. All the man needed to do to prolong his life was to bring up his father. Sora let out a scream as he saw Naruto remove his bloodied hand from what was left of Kazuma's head before turning to face him. Naruto fired up another Reikiri as he emerged from the crater he had created and started to gently approach Sora. This boy had to be killed. Konoha would declare war if they learned that someone else possessed the Kyuubi's power. Naruto arrived at the sobbing youngster and gave him a brief, sympathetic look. His big eyes were fixed on his father's lifeless body, and Sora didn't even notice him. Why You killed him. Naruto's gaze briefly strayed to Kazuma's physique before returning to Sora. Yes. I did. The lightning surrounding his arm started to flicker furiously, and his voice was as emotionless as his eyes. With no trace of regret in his eyes, Naruto withdrew his hand and prepared his Reikiri. It would be quick, hygienic, and painless. As the lightning strike drew nearer to his face, Sora continued to focus on his deceased father, saying, I'll kill you. I'll kill you. Its close proximity made his hair stand on end. I'll kill you. Naruto was knocked off his feet when red chakra erupted from his form. A beam of light blasted out from the angry false Jinchuriki, sending shockwaves across the settlement. Naruto winced and leapt to his feet just in time to witness 6 chakra tails swirling ominously behind the child. A dark red chakra cloak took over his shape as he crouched like an animal, with a skeleton suspended above it and connected by chakra ligaments. There were pools of white where his eyes should have been. His mouth extended wide, releasing a roar of pure chakra that had Naruto spend energy to strengthen his feet so they would stay on the ground rather than being blasted away. He turned to see Konohamaru go into a 4-tailed state akin to Sora's after hearing another roar from behind him. Naruto put his hands together and started concentrating his chakra, cursing as he realized he was between the two. A great pressure filled the air, and the wind began to blow furiously. The 2 Jinchuriki shifted as Naruto's strong chakra descended upon them, and then they growled and charged at him at breakneck speed. With a little ball of chakra appearing to hover in the middle of his palms, Naruto carefully unclasped his hands. Before it created a complete sphere of quickly spinning chakra, the ball got bigger. As illumination gathered around its shape, it shone a dazzling blue, creating a noticeable hum. The hue shifted to a pure white, and the sound of birds singing mixed with the hum. He turned his emphasis to the 2 Jinchuriki. Before destabilizing the revolving orb's chakra while they were on his form, he waited until they were sufficiently close. Rosin bolt. His hands clenched together. With wide eyes, Fuin gazed at the uncaring Junin before her, choking on her own blood. In a futile attempt to stop the rushing liquid that was pouring out of her throat, she clutched her throat. In her last moments, She managed to sneer and gurgle a curse at her heartless killer as she fell to her knees silently, her elegant clothing torn to pieces. Kurenai's eyes were apathetic as she held the bleeding kunai in her palm. She flicked her wrist, causing the knife to fly through the air and bury itself in the dying woman's head with a thump. Fuen's eyes remained wide open as she slowly fell backward, her body bending at an odd angle from its previous position and her head striking the ground. Kurenai sighed with exhaustion and carefully tended to her injured shoulder. Her dress was stained scarlet as blood seeped from the wound. With a pout on her lovely face, she viewed the gradually cooling body with indifference. Fuen's conceit was what ultimately brought about her demise for someone who loved strategy and traps. With the exception of her strong earth jutsu, she wasn't very strong, yet she was able to slit the haughty woman's neck with a quick genjutsu. However, in the process, the woman cut her shoulder with a fortunate kunai swipe. The bitch. She tensed and then relaxed as a familiar green leotard emerged in a flurry of foliage, sensing an approaching chakra source. With the exception of appearing a little worn out, Maeda Guy appeared largely uninjured. The massive, motionless figure of Fudo was draped over his shoulder. Guy greeted her with a broad smile, but as soon as she saw the red stain on her shoulder, she grew concerned. Before she could blink, he dropped the bulky body and materialized in front of her. Kurenai-chan, you are wounded. Did your ghastly opponent prove too much for the flames of your youth? She let out a bitter groan and quickly stopped paying attention to Guy as he started fussing over her. She looked over his shoulder and saw that Fudo's neck was bent at an odd angle, leading her to conclude that the man had a fractured neck. Upon closer inspection, she saw that his face had a hollow indentation that resembled a fist. She looked at Guy and noticed that the man was still talking gibberish. But fear not. This wound in battle shows that your flames of youth burn all the more brighter. She interrupted him, firmly silencing him with a hand slapped over his mouth. Satisfied with the man's silence, she took her hand away and pointed at the body he had dumped. She asked, "How did you deal with the big guy?" Guy gave the man a fleeting glance before he fixed her with one of his ridiculously broad smiles and assumed his absurd stance. He gave her the thumbs up, winked, and said, "Pa, that brute was no match for the green beast. My flames of youth burned brighter than the morning sun. His diamond-hard skin proved ineffective for the flames of my morning peacock. His teeth were so white that they gave a proverbial ping." After a few moments of silent staring, Kurenai shook her head and chuckled a little at his antics. She gave his smiling cheek a quick pat and then pointed to her injured shoulder. "Do you mind wrapping this for me, please? I don't have any medical equipment on me." With a smile and a silent gesture, Guy motioned for her to turn around. She attempted to rearrange her hair by lifting her hand, but the movement agitated her wound, causing her to hiss. The gentleman that he was, he moved the black hair out of the way by gently holding her hair in an improvised ponytail. She waited calmly while Guy applied some bandages while holding her hair with her other arm. When he was done, Guy gave her a pat on the back and wrapped the wound tightly, raising her other arm slightly to do so. "All done, Kurenai-chan. The wound will hold for now, but you should make one of our lovely medics heal that for you." She shook her head slightly, tossing the long locks as she let her hair fall down her back. She nodded and rolled her wounded shoulder before turning to smile at Junin. She offered politely, "Thanks, Guy." She rolled her eyes once more as the green beast simply responded with his lovely man pose. She scowled as she looked about. "Have you heard from Asuma?" Guy shook his head after scratching his chin. "No, I think he still deals with that red-haired vixen." A well-groomed eyebrow shot up. "Vixen?" Ignoring the red-eyed woman's growing rage, Guy smiled. "Indeed. Though an enemy, that woman Fuka, I believe, is a deadly seductress of men." He sighed. "I fear Asuma-kun might have fell prey to her deadly charms." He retreated shyly as he felt her glare. "Not that I don't believe he would, when he has such a lovely woman as yourself, Kurenai-chan," he said, grinning cautiously. The figure of her inner rage materialized in a flurry of leaves before she could respond. Asuma staggered into the clearing where the two Junin were restrained, her form burned and her breathing rough. He nearly dropped to his knees as he trudged in front of them, looking worse for wear. Leaning on his knees for support, he offered them a tired smile in greeting before he promptly dropped on his rear. He raised his face to see Kurenai's burning crimson eyes after sensing a furious look on his body. He arched an eyebrow with a bewildered expression. "What?" Silently, she gestured to his shape. After blinking, Asuma pointed at the thing he was holding. "This?" he asked, raising his brilliant red hair in a clump. "Oh, this is just a trophy. That woman was a tough one. Can you believe that she could use all 5 elements?" He blew a whistle. "She was quite the Challen," he hissed and clutched his shin in agony. He bit out, "What the hell was that for?" Kurenai pointed to his face after lowering her foot. Her eyes furrowed as she said, "I wasn't talking about that, you idiot." She folded her arms beneath her amazing bust and asked, "Why do you have lipstick on your lips?" Oh. Under her flaming eyes, Asuma writhed within. He noticed remnants of the cherry-flavored lipstick Fuka had left on his lips as he wiped them and looked at his fingers. He looked to Guy for assistance, shuddering at the idea that he had been caught red-handed, but noticed that the Junin had his back to him, his eyes fixed on the specific landscape since he was currently fascinated by the way the trees were moving in the wind. He had to act fast to save the day. He dropped the clump of hair and stood up on wobbly legs, grinning sheepishly and extending his hands in an appeasing gesture. "Haha, funny you should mention that, Kurenai-chan. You see, the woman had a particular jutsu that she used in the form of a kiss that sucks the chakra out of her victim. I had to resort." He came to a halt at the lifted, outstretched palm. "Wait 1 second, she said in a tone that sent shivers down his spine. "That woman," she said, pointing to the red hair on the floor, "had a jutsu that sucks chakra out of her victims in the form of a kiss?" Her tone was obviously incredulous. "And you fell for such a jutsu? A seasoned veteran, falling to the charms of a kiss?" In response, Asuma stammered, It's not like that. I was overwhelmed by her jutsu and she trapped me. I thought she was going to finish me, but all she did was kiss me, and I felt my chakra being drained." She continued to gaze. "And I managed to substitute myself in the nick of time and surprised her. I found out her weakness was her hair, and I scalped her with my chakra blades. It was an act of desperation. Due of his low chakra, he struck out furiously and completely removed her head." He whimpered when she persisted in her glare. "Believe me, it's not like I wanted to be kissed to death. Considering all the ways to pass away, it wouldn't be all that horrible to go out with a kiss." He smiled unintentionally, though that wouldn't be so bad. When he realized what he had spoken, his eyes grew wide. Kurenai's enraged form rocketed a slap to his head, causing him to spin before collapsing on his face. That was the only warning he received. "Ass!" she yelled as she walked away. She called over her shoulder, "You can sleep in your own bed for the next month," before flickering away. Asuma slid onto his back and nursed the crimson handprint on his face, merely moaning. He looked up to see Guy's sympathetic expression as a shadow passed over his shape. Strong hands gently brushed the dust that had gathered on his vest as he accepted the offered hand and was lifted to his feet. There Asuma-kun. Kurenai-chan will soon come around, but I advise being a little more subtle next time." Asuma nursed his face and nodded pitifully. He rolled his tongue and moaned, "Shit, that hurt. I tasted blood with that one." Guy laughed heartily. He clapped his palm on his back and pointed to the area the irate woman had left, saying, "Indeed. An angry woman is a dangerous woman. Now come. We must return to the village at once. I fear Naruto-kun may be in a bit of..." A quick spike in chakra caused both Junin to tremble. A few seconds later, a massive flash of light that appeared to originate in the town spread out in every direction. The wave of lighting moved quickly, expanding until it briefly phased through the two Junin, numbing their limbs before it vanished into thin air. Asuma wondered what the heck it was, but the query died on his lips as Guy shoved him to the ground just in time to see an even more powerful and devastating burst of lightning thunder across the earth, leveling everything in its path. As the wave passed over them and gave their forms a slight shock, both Junin trembled. Guy lifted his head off the ground and waited till the lethal wave had safely passed. He looked around and saw that everything was flattened and burned. He could see the outlines of a sizable crater toward the village. He scowled and fingered the top of his head after lightly dusting himself off and groaning as he stood up. His well-known bowl-cut hair was completely disheveled and standing on edge. He heard a moan and saw Asuma slowly stand up, his burned body identical to his own. Asuma cursed while scratching his now spiky hair. What the fuck was that? Guy felt a familiar chakra source approaching before he could respond, and both Junin had to suppress their smiles when Kurenai materialized. Her usually long, flowing black hair was standing straight up in the air, stiff on end. She stomped up to the two, growling. She growled, "What was that?" She growled as they both just gazed at her. "What?" Guy fought back the laugh that was about to burst out of his face as he saw Asuma quickly turn away, hiding his smile. "That would be one of my eternal rival's more destructive jutsu. The spiraling bolt. A devastatingly destructive attack, although that was the underpowered version as he wasn't in that form." Kurenai asked inquisitively, attempting to smooth her hair, "And what is this form you speak of?" She feared to consider the full-powered version if the so-called rosin bolt that had just destroyed the area was underpowered. You can ask him yourself when you see him. For now we must make haste, and head to the village or whatever is left of it. The three nodded and accelerated as they waited for Asuma to get up. Naruto deliberately destabilized the concentrated ball of pure lightning chakra by slamming his fists together just before the massive pulse of lighting that had branched out. He silently whispered a prayer for the nearby souls, aware of the devastating nature of his strike. He felt eyes on his physique as if time had stopped. He looked up and saw a little girl seeing him through a nearby window. Her brown, inquisitive eyes were staring at him with wonder. "Pardon me," he said in a quiet voice, "Rosin Bolt." He let out a cry, and a massive pulse of lightning quickly sprang from his body and spread out broadly. The pulse suspended the Jinchuriki in midair, just moments before they were close enough to see the perspiration on his brow. They both growled as they strained in their brief suspension, but Naruto stretched his arms wide in an arc and sent them hurtling back with a roar and a lethal pulse. The tremendous force of the jutsu instantaneously created a crater beneath his feet, which quickly grew and engulfed surrounding structures. The raw pulse of illumination tore apart nearby buildings, and the volume of volts caused them to disintegrate. The same tragedy befell the villagers who were hiding. They were hiding in surrounding buildings when they saw the three of them fighting. The hairs on their bodies stood up as the first pulse branched out and suspended them in midair, giving them no chance to flee. As the second pulse arrived with the thundering sound of cracking, the young child, who had been observing Naruto since he first appeared, reached out to her mother in an unsuccessful attempt to touch her. She screamed, and then there was a horrifying rumble. Before her mother's flesh crumbled in front of her eyes, brown eyes saw her open her mouth in a silent cry. Her skin came first, then her muscles, until the bones were all that were left. Before all that remained were the atoms of her cells to emphasize her premature death, they too disappeared with the sound of thunder. She also met the same end as her mother, boom. With a bang that shook the ground, the thundering bolt, true to its name, completed the attack like a flash of lightning. Naruto collapsed to his knees in the center of the massive crater, wheezing as his chakra supplies began to run low. Drips of sweat that dropped immediately vanished as light swirled delicately about his form. He wheezed to himself, "That was more exhausting than I thought." He raised himself and stood on heavy legs with the help of his hands. He sighed as he looked about at the devastation he had inflicted on the village. A snarl distracted him. He looked to his left and saw Konohamaru's four-tailed form slowly rising. Even while his cloak provided superior protection, it was oozing red chakra, almost as if it were bleeding from the recent terrible onslaught. It was mostly damaged, exposing his burned skin underneath. Sora's body next to him was motionless, blackened by the assault. One of Konohamaru's four tails pierced Naruto's body before he could respond. Sora suddenly woke up and let out a scream that sent shivers down Naruto's spine. Konohamaru's tail flared red like a pump draining liquid, and Sora's last chakra was violently drawn out. The bloody red form formed and enveloped his entire body once more, quickly healing his prior wounds. His figure turned very pale, and Sora shuddered and started to gargle on blood. Naruto yelled as Sora's body grew so thin that his bones were exposed beneath his skin, and the tail continued to drain like a parasite. As Naruto pushed forward, the quickly spinning ball of chakra swirled in his fingers, solidifying and producing a noticeable hum as it reached its full capacity. Rosin. As Konohamaru's tail flickered and the Sora's body was flung forward into his path, his Sharingan grew wider. Naruto, already worn out from his previous jutsu, was unable to respond in time as he struck the small body with bone-jarring force while attempting to control the Kyuubi's chakra. Sora's motionless body struck his stomach head first with enough force to stop Naruto in his blur of speed, causing a terrible crack. Naruto was certain that some ribs had just fractured after tasting blood. He had pulled the Rasengan out of the way in a desperate attempt to prevent the boy's corpse from being turned to mincemeat. The boy's neck shattered instantaneously during the accident, leaving him wide open, so the fleeting act had cost him. As Konohamaru tackled Naruto with such power that Sora's body in between them bent at an unusual angle and the sound of his back breaking reverberated through the air, his form shot forward, leaving fissures in his wake. The two collided with the crater's edge, bounced out of it, and landed in a heap close to one of the village's level streets. Naruto coughed up blood, leaving a large stain on his mask. Konohamaru's shape hovered over him, unrelenting, its razor-sharp claws poised to split his face in two. Naruto's hand rushed out, stopping the glowing appendage just an inch from his face. The intervention was so close that a crimson finger came into contact with his headgear and burned through the metal. At first touch, The glove on his hand burned off. Naruto hissed as the same corroded effect affected his hand that was gripping the Jinchuriki's wrist. He snarled and lunged forward, aiming for his face with the still-spinning Rasengan in his palm. Konohamaru returned the favor by extending his clawed hand and wrapping it around his wrist, stopping the assault as the razor-sharp claws sank into his skin. This time, Naruto's cry of agony was uncontrollable. They each attempted to overwhelm each other in the ensuing struggle for domination. Ah! Fuck! The agony was excruciating. He felt corrosive chakra eroding his bone, long since burning through the surrounding muscle and fat, causing fourth-degree burns on both his hand and wrist. He roared as he pushed through, and the Rasengan he was holding continued to spin as it got closer to Konohamaru's face. Naruto gradually started to defeat the Jinchuriki, inch by excruciating inch. The small body cuddled on his lap, corroded to bones by their close proximity, escaped his attention. In spite of the fierce struggle, Naruto's Sharingan looked down at Sora and saw that half of his face was eroding while the other half was frozen into a tiny smile. The entire front part of his body would have been eroded by now if Sora's body hadn't fallen on top of him. Push, damn it. Push. He moaned to himself. His Rasengan got closer and closer. The four tails that had been spinning stood on edge and then pivoted, poised and ready to pierce right through him, while the seemingly endless white eyes narrowed. Four chains shouted his shape and wrapped around the tails that bound them with a frenzied chakra burst. Due to his weakened state, he was unable to detect that the chains had lost their golden sheen and that they reflected his figure, looking chipped and corroded. The tinkling of cracks was audible, yet they continued to withstand the strain. He knew his condition had gone from bad to screwed when the chains refused to obey his mental order to drain the chakra. Fuck. Come on, Konohamaru, fight it, he cried out in desperation as his reserves started to run low. He growled as he started to lose control of the Rasengan that had been so near to his skull. The spinning ball slowed to a standstill and eventually evaporated because his chakra supplies were so low. The searing heat of Konohamaru's four-tailed state was getting closer, and the perspiration on his brow was quickly disappearing. His Sharingan whirled quickly in his eye, looking for anything that could provide a brief pause to stop the genin. Then he heard it. A howl that sounded more like a moan of agony appeared to be released by the savage Jinchuriki. With a howl that shook the ground, his mouth opened wide, revealing his brilliant white throat. His ears, which had been erect, dropped to the sides of his forehead as he lowered his head. Naruto's eyes widened and he watched numbly as Konohamaru's mouth moved slowly, Sen. Naruto quickly removed the caustic appendage from the clawed claws gripping his wrist. He looked at his own limbs, staring at blackened bone, and had to force himself to suppress a shudder. The only reason the corrosive burn didn't instantly destroy his limbs was because of his remaining chakra reserves. His gaze was drawn to Konohamaru by another growl as the white pools for his eyes gradually burned away to expose a recognizable brown, and the dark crimson, nearly black chakra surrounding his eyes gradually faded. The flesh surrounding his eyes was a fiery crimson, mending quickly while still experiencing the same degradation. Sensei. I hear you, Konohamaru, I hear you. Without wasting any time, Naruto attempted to put the Jinchuriki into a genjutsu-induced sleep by pushing the last of his reserves to his Sharingan. Everything turned dark as soon as their eyes met. What the where am I? He asked, sounding as though his own voice was coming from everywhere. Dazed and perplexed, Naruto forced himself to stand up and surveyed the filthy, murky waters he was lying in. He stood up and took in his surroundings, gazing with wide eyes at the many trees and plants. There were dead-looking, broken trees all throughout the place. The plants he had been studying appeared to have never seen the sun because they were dried out and wilted. He was unable to see his own feet in the ankle-deep water since it was so filthy. A marsh, more significantly. A marsh. Slowly making his way through the murky waters, Naruto looked around for any indications of life, or, more crucially, a brown-haired genin. But all he could see as he navigated the filthy waters were the silent trees and plants. The silence was as still as the dead, even though swamps were meant to be bustling with life. Not even insects. Strangely, there was an unsettling orange glow throughout the swamp. The glow was more intensely red, creating an unsettlingly blood-like illusion. However, no light sources could be seen. What the hell? The glow became brighter the farther he traveled, as if it were gradually calling to him from the enveloping darkness. He froze when he looked up at the sky for the first time, expecting to see something regular. That sky was anything but typical. As far as his eye could see, the sky was completely black, blanketing the horizon. Blood-colored clouds moved slowly across the pitch-black chasm, their otherworldly light making them stand out against the black. Even so, he didn't freeze. The big circle positioned in the sky like a sentry was what truly drew his attention. There was no sun there. The moon's red hue matched the cloud's bloody hue. Only it was brighter, highlighting the dark crimson clearing he entered. The trees encircled the space as though attempting to conceal something, and he was unaware that he had entered an open clearing in the middle of a lake. With a sense of dread rising in the pit of his stomach, he moved forward slowly and attentively. He reached up to his shoulder and grasped the blade's handle firmly. His lips dropped open in bewilderment as his wrist drew his attention. The moment he arrived, the corrosive chakra that had been tormenting his body had stopped burning. His brow furrowed as he looked at his limbs and saw perfectly unmarred flesh that was accentuated in red by the moonlight. The corrosive chakra had long since burned his gloves to ashes, yet he appeared to be healed. He could still feel the hole Konohamaru had left in his headband when his finger touched him. He silently whispered, mouthing the phrase aloud, "What the hell?" However, the words reverberated, causing the waves to pulse into a phantom ripple. The sound of his voice reverberated for what seemed like a lifetime but was actually only a matter of seconds, until the eerie quiet that had initially struck him reappeared. The murky waters that had previously been too dirty to see through gradually started to clarify, but the ripples in the water had stopped. The dark waters receded with a beautiful blue as the water cleared initially at the clearing's edge and gradually extended downward. His eyes widened as he realized the clearing of water he was standing in was actually a prison, and the sight of enormous bars became obvious. Had he been perched on a cage? Something called him to look down, and he was unable to think about the question any longer. Fear paralyzed him as two enormous, blood-red eyes opened and became fixated on his figure. Before he could blink, he had already crossed the clearing and climbed into the tree's protection. His heart thundered against his ribs as if it were about to burst, and he placed a hand on his chest in an attempt to slow it down. His body was trembling and his breathing was rapid. It was the most fear he had ever experienced in his life. There was such a fierce flare of hatred and evil in those eyes. He was frozen with horror by the unadulterated deadly intent he felt. The beast had only given him a quick glance. He inhaled deeply through his nose and exhaled through his mouth. In order to avoid going into shock, he needed to relax his body. He clenched his fist, closed his eyes, and forced himself to remain composed. When he dug deep within his reserves, he discovered that they were completely refilled, and soon the reassuring warmth that had given him a boost during his battle with the Gobi Jinchuriki settled into his gut. When he opened his eyes, the fearful expression gave way to one of steady calm. He could defeat this beast if his father had. As he leapt back onto the crystal-clear waters, he secretly persuaded himself that he had left his shadow behind out of fear due to the area's surprise and the paranoia of traveling through the unknown. Before he could take another step, he stopped himself. What if someone grabs me through the bars? He could bid farewell with a kiss on his ass because he would be eaten sooner than those poor people in that awful shark movie. As a golden chain flew out and clung to the tallest tree he could locate, he told himself, better be safe than sorry. Another chain sprang out and attached itself to the top of the tree he saw on the other side of the clearing, which was of sufficient height. He felt himself gently rise into the air as he shortened them, and his body gradually started to drift to the center of the waters, dangling above. He made an effort to ignore the blood-red eyes that patiently and discreetly observed everything he did. He was dangling above a shark-like prey, and if he made a mistake, he would fall into the waiting jaws. He lost his impeccable equilibrium as a result of the idea. As he fell, he felt his entire world swirl. Fuck! He was stopped cold, his face inches from the water, when a third chain shot out from his back and foolishly grabbed onto the nearest branch. He had snapped his eyes shut out of fear that he would soon be fox food, but he opened his Sharingan eye when he sensed that his chain was fastened. He yelled loudly, "Fuck!" as he retreated, sending his shackles bouncing through the air. With the assurance that he would have fallen into its waiting jaws, the Kyuubi had opened its mouth wide, revealing countless rows of razor-sharp teeth. After bouncing about, Naruto willed his chains to shorten once again, leveling him comfortably. Now that he had perfect balance thanks to the third chain, he could force himself to unwind for a bit. He wiped the perspiration from his brow and inhaled deeply at the near-death experience. He believed that he should have seen the look on your face. The Kyuubi's red eyes stared at Naruto as he began to descend. It would seem the Uzumaki blood runs strong through you, Naruto. Naruto gazed numbly at the beast he had encountered since birth. Kyuubi. It smiled at his name, its teeth as big as the biggest tree he had seen since arriving. It smiled once more and grasped the iron bars with its enormous hands, the claws on its fingers longer than his torso. Come closer, Naruto. No need to be shy. Behind it, 9 tails that were bigger than the Hokage Tower waved hypnotically. The brilliant red of the moon was obscured by a cloud, creating an image of 2 red spots that belonged to the enormous beast, gleaming hungrily as they studied his shape. Get nearer. They were too close to one another. Naruto joked, I'm fine right here. I believe we can have a suitable conversation from this distance. He recognized the beast had just chuckled when he heard a sound that sounded like drumming with a hint of evil. Though I want to, I couldn't harm you even if I tried. It demonstrated this by slipping beyond the bars and pressing its palm against the water as if it were enclosed by an imaginary wall. A glowing symbol in the middle of the water displayed the characters for seal. The seal disappeared when the 9 tails withdrew its palm. One enormous finger beckoned him, slowly bending as its long nails scraped the water. See, now come. We have much to discuss, you and I. The Sharingan's tomos gently whirled in Naruto's sight as he gazed for a little while. Silently, he pulled a kunai from his pouch. The knife fell to clear waters as he let gravity finish the work with a leisurely flick of his wrist. As it bounced along the seas and encountered resistance before settling on the phantom wall, his eye narrowed. Before he gave his chains a mental order to gradually start to lengthen, red and blue met brilliant crimson. The chains stretched in response to the order, allowing Naruto to gradually start moving in the direction of the bars. When Naruto's feet touched the water, the fox smiled before covering its face with a neutral expression. He let the chains slowly dissolve back inside of him as he bent down to fetch his kunai while maintaining eye contact with the fox. He stared the Kyuubi down in total quiet as the last of the chains slipped inside of him, and the sound of a sliding metal broke the stillness. As he got closer, he could see that the Kyuubi's enormous bulk just floated in water, so the bars didn't really act as a cage. His eyes could perceive no limit to the dark depths, and there was no discernible earth underneath. An unending, horizontal cage. It was a thought-provoking sight. The Kyuubi growled slightly and then lowered its face toward him, its big eyes fixed to the unique ball in his left socket, interrupting his observation. It sounded more like a snarl than a question, and Naruto could detect the underlying hatred. How did you come to possess that eye? Observing how its eyes shrunk to slits, he fired back, wouldn't you like to know? Naruto arched an eyebrow, saying, eyes more sinister than my own should not be handed lightly, boy. The fox's ruby eyes seemed to glow with fierce hatred as it smiled at his bewilderment. It appeared to move closer, placing its massive muzzle directly beneath his feet. I sense it, I can feel the same chakra from that eye. Yes, that eye belongs to him. Naruto's eyes narrowed, and he found himself bending forward and kneeling so he could look directly into the Kyuubi's big eyes. Whose eye does belong to? The beast smiled, its eyes glowing after appearing to sparkle with laughter. The same man, on that day. Naruto was becoming irritated. What day? Whose eye is this? Kakashi never told him how he got his eye. He had pestered the man countless times, but he would never tell him. Who? With fear, he yelled. Don't you want to know? It wouldn't be fun if I tell you all the answers. That way I at least know you'll come back, it said smugly, repeating what he had said earlier. Naruto hissed, but as he saw movement out of the corner of his eye, words on the tip of his tongue froze. His sword was drawn instantly, and he stood in stance, ready to strike. His eyes widened, and as Konohamaru's floating body emerged from the waters, his sword almost fell from his grip. Naruto was hovering over the unconscious genin in an instant, his face turned upward, but he was still unsure if he had drowned. Sheathing his sword, he gently held the unconscious genin and scooped him out of the water. The youngster was breathing, but his breaths were short, his normally fair skin was pale, and there were big bags under his eyes. He dropped to one knee and rested the boy's head on his leg. He laid his ear against his chest and sighed with relief when he found a steady heartbeat. Konohamaru. Naruto shook him gently. Come on buddy, wake up. He shook him firmly a few times, but nothing seemed to wake him. Konohamaru, he said, holding him in one arm and slapping his face softly with his free palm. His words reverberated loudly through the quiet, yet Konohamaru remained motionless. The boy is weak, the voice said, drawing Naruto's attention back to the lake's center. Naruto's eyes narrowed at the arrogant tone, and he moved forward, holding Konohamaru firmly in his arms, until he was standing and gazing down at the Kyuubi's glowing eyes. His mind is strong, but his body is weak, it repeated. What do you mean by that? Naruto asked, narrowing his gaze at it. The beast smiled, then raised a claw finger and pointed horizontally. Naruto frowned, but he followed the direction and looked at the trees and water, but he saw nothing. He turned back to the beast, his eyes reflecting his bewilderment. What? Tired with its games, he bit out. Its long pink tongue stretched out and slowly licked the waters directly beneath his feet, and although it had long since returned its fingers to gripping the bars, its grin this time spoke volumes. Fear filled him, and he gave the beast a quick glance before returning his focus to the direction it had indicated. His Sharingan continued to flicker quickly in search of something, anything that would have indicated what the beast was pointing at or appeared odd. His Sharingan spun quickly as it attempted to take in every detail, and soon the image of the water slowly receding became as plain as day to his eyes. He trailed off as he finally observed something at the river's edge, by the banks. To make sure he hadn't dreamed what he had just witnessed, he closed his right eye, giving his Sharingan full vision. Sure enough, the once clear waters receded once more, draining ever so slowly, and muck was replacing them like a growing plague. The Kyuubi grabbed the bars tightly and said, "Yes. Your leaders are fools. The greatest mistake they made was breaking the line of previous host." Both eyes widened before he turned to face the Kyuubi, who grinned at his revelation. His comments caused Naruto's thoughts to race. He remembered that his mother had been the previous Jinchuriki, and that Mito Uzumaki, the first Hokage's wife, had been the previous host for the Kyuubi. He trailed off when he noticed its smile. "Wait, are you saying that I? Naruto, have you not sensed the connection? I mean, it was just me and you together, for 10 years, it said, its countenance changing to one of feigned hurt. Lengthy. Months. It concluded by observing the growing fear on his countenance. A long talon pointed to Konohamaru and said, "No matter. I'll be seeing you soon. Real soon." As he was thrown out of the mindscape, the last sound he heard was its evil laughter. With his blade drawn an inches from the neck of his human shield, Naruto jumped out of the bed he had inhibited, grabbed the hand that was inches from his face and twisting it behind its owner's back. The air was filled with his murderous intent as his Sharingan narrowed to slits and flared an angry red. He was met with wide eyes. He blinked and looked bewildered at the leaf headbands and green coats before looking down at a furious, red-faced Kurenai. Seeing that he had almost hurt another leaf soldier, he grinned and said, "Hi there." Kurenai blinked stupidly, then frowned. "Let me go, you moron." Kurenai pushed herself away from Naruto and rolled the arm he was holding while glaring at him with her unique red eyes. Naruto gently released her arm and smoothly sheathed his blade after removing it from her neck. Naruto pulled on her hand with genuine sadness, saying, "I'm sorry, Kurenai-chan." She squeezed his hand warmly and said, "It's fine." Her eyes softened somewhat as she heard the sincerity in his voice. "I didn't mean to harm you." With a little smile, Naruto released her hand and turned to face the spacious hospital tent they were in. "What happened?" "You were moaning in your sleep, and sweating," she said, standing on her tiptoes and reaching up to brush back his sleek, blonde hair that had become disheveled. "I came to try and wake you and you. You know," she said, nodding with her hands as she adjusted his hair and stood back up. Naruto nodded slowly, but before he could ask any more questions, the two were encircled by a familiar green vest. "Geez, remind me never to try to wake you, Naruto." Asuma puffed on his cigarette and drawled lazily, looking at Kurenai. "You okay, Kurenai-chan?" He was quickly disregarded. "Come on, don't tell me you're still angry," he complained. Guy marched over to Naruto and gave him a bear embrace, ignoring Asuma's distress. "Oh my forever competitor. Now that you are awake from your peaceful sleep, I celebrate. When we discovered you unconscious, I was really concerned." Tears streamed from his eyes as he sobbed. After letting out a sigh, Naruto gave the strange guy a gentle pat on the back and said, There, Guy." The man stopped crying but did not let go. "Please put me down now." Guy gave a bashful smile but complied. "When you performed your Rasen whatever," Kurenai said, rolling her eyes at Guy's antics. "We rushed to the village to find you," she said, glaring at him for his correction of Bolt. "When we did, Konohamaru was leaned over you and burning, and you were unconscious in the street. There was a small, unrecognizable corroded body sandwiched between the two of you." "My hands, when you found me, weren't they burned?" Naruto asked, his eyes widening as he looked down at what she had said. "My hands, when you found me, weren't they burned? The skin was once charred black, burned into the bone." "No, when we discovered you were completely unharmed, save for your headband," Kurenai said with a slow shake of her head. "Konohamaru was the only one who was burned, and even then, he was gradually getting better." With his eyes wide, He ran a hand over his nude head and said, "Haven't you felt the connection, Naruto?" His mind reeled until his heart pounded against his chest. What the fuck was going on? Kurenai's soft voice, her eyes worried, brought him back to reality. "What happened out there?" she asked, gazing up at him. "When I felt the Kyuubi's chakra, I rushed to the source expecting to find Konohamaru," he said, sensing that everyone in the tent was staring at him. "I did locate him, however." "But what?" She softly nudged him, observing the dimness in his eyes. There was another container of the Kyuubi's chakra. Whispers of alarm grew, and then the room erupted in shouting. "Another Jinchuriki? That is not feasible. Oh shit, the higher-ups are going to lose their teeth. War could result from this." After the final remark, panic erupted, and everyone started yelling and using profanity. "Just shut the fuck up, everyone." When there was silence, Kurenai huffed and mumbled, "Thank you," with a disarming smile. Everyone halted, mouths dropping agape as she stood tall and imposing, wreaking death intent at anyone who dared meet or stare. She motioned for him to go on, saying, "Now, Naruto-kun, as you were saying." At her instruction, Naruto schooled his face while keeping his eyes wide open and his brow above his hairline. All right. It was essentially one-sided when they were fighting. Konohamaru was preparing to kill Sora, the imposter Jinchuriki, by beating him. I tried to stop his chakra just in time, but Kazuma stopped me. "Who?" she asked, failing to notice Asuma's eyes growing wide. Furito Tsuyoshi was a fictitious name. Kazuma was his true name. He was the head of the One King demonstrators, and he was aware of our arrival when word spread from South Dakota. He licked his lips and said, the day of the Kyuubi attack, he had sealed the beast's remaining chakra into his son. He set a trap, wanting to use his son Sora. He intended to destroy the hamlet and use Sora as a weapon against Konoha. "Where is he?" With a murderous expression, Asuma asked. Naruto looked him in the eye and said, "Dead." Guy asked, "So then what happened?" Naruto combed through his hair. "Well, things went to shit and both of them sprouted 4 tails. I used my rosin bolt in the village, managing to momentarily disable the duo. But Konohamaru managed to brush off the attack, and drain the Kyuubi's chakra from Sora and emaciating him, and then came after me. He stuffed his hands into his pockets. And that's when you guys found me." Kurenai asked, looking into his eyes, "Is that everything?" She placed a hand on his shoulder when he failed to respond. "Naruto?" He let out a long breath but remained silent. He decided to take her hand gently and head for the door. "That's everything important." As people moved aside to make room for him to leave, he murmured. Everyone's eyes were fixed on his back in bewilderment. Guy held Kurenai's hand firmly yet gently when it appeared that she might pursue him. Her ruby eyes met his, and he shook his head. He raised a hand as she was ready to respond, saying, "Let him go, Kurenai-chan. I know you have questions. We all have questions, but right now isn't the time." Asuma folded his arms. There were nods of improvement as he said, "He can't just leave us hanging like that. We'll get our answers later. For now we must all rest, it's been a long night," he said. Kurenai mimicked Asuma's face as she watched Naruto's green vest vanish into the genin tent. "What's wrong with him, Guy?" she said, her eyes saddened by his appearance. He looked like he was in so much pain. Guy gave a rigid nod. Indeed. Any genin who had passed the test could sleep in the long rows of beds inside the genin tent. As he walked in, Naruto scoffed to himself. As if their impressionable brains could go to sleep after murdering defenseless people. The rows of lights on the walls dimmed and the tent became dark. Every now and then, a nurse would visit beds and provide consoling words to any child in need. Benches were placed at the end of the tent for anyone who couldn't sleep, and he saw Team 7 snuggled next to one another there. He trudged toward his squad in silence, nodding to the occasional nurse who grinned at him. He secretly breathed a sigh of relief when Konohamaru's brown eyes recognized him first and the genin sprung out of his seat. "Sensei." Naruto didn't care if his voice was loud enough to wake everyone in the tent right now. The tiny boy ran at him, but he caught him by opening his arms wide. He was joined by 2 other voices, and 2 little bodies struck Naruto, knocking him to the ground. He cast a hungry glance over them, examining every inch of their bodies to see if any hair was missing. He felt a strange wetness in his eyes and the fear in his stomach vanish when he saw they were alive and breathing. There was nothing that made him cry. However, Naruto didn't care when tears welled up in his eyes as he encircled their small bodies, speaking consoling words in response to Sakura's sobs. He felt that this long night had been worthwhile as he tucked Konohamaru's head firmly under his neck and rubbed calming circles into Sasuke's back. He believed that nothing else in the world mattered after everything that had transpired today. As long as Team 7 was with him. Konohamaru looked up, his complexion pleasantly returning to its natural color. Rubbing away the sticky liquid in his eye, Sasuke nodded in agreement and said, "We worried about you. All the other Junin-sensei came for the teams except you." Sakura gave him a tearful smile as they all chuckled at his well-known justification. "Ma, my bad guys. I was a little tired you see and had to take a nap." She put her arms around his neck and kissed his disguised cheek. "I don't care, sensei, as long as you're here." Naruto wheezed slightly as 3 pairs of arms encircled his body, and the lads felt the same way. But since his big hands surrounded their tiny bodies, creating a barrier from the curious eyes seeing them, he dared not voice any complaints. He murmured to them, "I'm proud of you guys." They all bumped heads so Naruto could see each pair of eyes. "You can't imagine how relieved I am to have all 3 of you. You guys are the best." Sasuke held up his pinky finger, delighted he had his squad and, for once, unconcerned with thoughts of retaliation. Team 7 forever. Sakura mimicked his antics while giggling. Team 7 forever. Konohamaru smiled. "Hell yeah, we're the best." With a laugh, Naruto mirrored his squad and extended his pinky. They trembled on it, entwining their fingers. Team 7 forever. After returning to Konoha and bidding farewell to Junin and other teams, Naruto made the decision to personally escort each and every one of his genin home. Sakura was the first place to go. After arriving at her parents' house and softly ringing the doorbell, they all waited for a short while before hearing a rush of footsteps and seeing 2 anxious-looking parents open the door. Naruto saw a man with the most absurd hairdo he had ever seen. When Kazashi Haruno saw his daughter, he furiously shook his dull pink hair in the shape of a cherry blossom. Sakura-chan. He grabbed up the girl in his big hands and started crying uncontrollably, his angular mustache damp with tears. Although his words were incomprehensible, it appeared that he was expressing gratitude by shaking Naruto's hands and bringing an embarrassed Sakura inside who managed to wave back. Seeing herself as the more rational parent, a blonde woman shook his hand and thanked him profusely. She bowed to him and his group, wished them a restful evening, and carefully shut the door. Before long, her voice joined her husband in sobbing. He shrugged in response to the boys' glances, and they carried on. Konohamaru arrived at the expansive Sarutobi compound next. Konohamaru hesitated and turned hesitantly to his sensei as the guards nodded at the squad and motioned for him. He trailed off when he noticed Naruto's wave. Sensei about the queue." The small child nodded before being carried away. "Don't worry about Ko, we'll talk tomorrow. As for now, go home and rest." Silently strolling alongside Sasuke, they proceeded to the Uchiha complex. Out of the corner of his eye, Naruto noticed Sasuke staring at him, but he remained silent. Naruto walked silently for a bit before turning to face him. "Something wrong, Sasuke?" When the boy realized he was gazing, he quickly stopped. Naruto looked at him bewildered, mirroring him. "What is it?" Sasuke glanced at him but was unable to face him in the eye. He appeared to be going through an internal fight, and his shoulders were stiff. He cleared his throat and said, Can you?" His cheeks began to flush as he trailed off. "You know, my mom cooks really well. And she always wanted to meet you. I mean, I know you have a home and all, but you can stay with Ms. Stay with us for tonight." A soft smile appeared beneath his mask as Naruto silently gazed at him. "I would love to," he said openly, "but I have to report to the Hokage, plus a worried blonde is waiting for me at home." Despite appearing dejected, Sasuke nodded and continued to move forward. After chuckling as he followed, Naruto placed an arm around the boy's shoulders and messed up his hair. Sasuke slapped his hands away, his face flushed with shame, but he couldn't contain his sincere grin. They both stopped at the yell, "Sasuke!" and turned to look toward the main Uchiha house, where they saw a figure on the steps. When Mikoto Uchiha saw her boy, she stood there in her usual black dress, tears welling up in her eyes. She leapt down the stairs and ran towards the two, overcome with emotion and overcoming her own worries. "Sasuke." Sasuke's eyes were wide with shock at what he saw, and his brows were furrowed. "Mom?" he asked, using his Sharingan to check if he was witnessing a genjutsu. "Mom," he said as he took off, meeting his mother halfway and embracing her. Naruto approached while maintaining a reasonable distance to give the mother and son their time. Mikoto's hand was constantly running through her son's black hair, and her eyes were welling with tears. As Sasuke's face was showered with kisses and the young boy's shame echoed, Naruto had to stifle a giggle. She halted, but not before giving him a thorough examination. "Mom, please, not in front of my sensei," she exclaimed. She hugged him tightly, satisfied that he was unharmed, and then looked at Naruto, her eyes widening. Naruto bowed in greeting right away. He addressed her as Lady Uchiha. Naruto. He raised his head upon recognizing her voice. Her eyes swept over his physique in shock as a hand covered her mouth. He approached the two and came to a stop in front of them. Hi, having only met him a few times since he was a baby, he was shocked that this woman could still recall him. The embrace he received caught him off guard. Naruto-kun. She kept a safe distance from him. Look at you. So tall. Last time we met you were such a small thing. He remained silent out of embarrassment and unease. Before focusing on his mask, her hands scanned his body. She met his gaze and murmured quietly, "May I?" This was both the mother of his closest friend and the best friend of his mother. No, she let go of his mask, pouted a little, and put her hands in his. "Thank you, for taking care of my boy. The whole village was constantly talking about some dangerous test and I was worried sick." He gave a headshake. "You don't need to thank me." He had long since made up his mind to give his life to defend his squad. She met his gaze and grinned slightly, saying, "Well, even if you don't accept it, I'll thank you anyway. Kami, Minato and Kushina would have been so proud." The remark made his heart swell a little, but he forced the emotion to subside. He could only shake his head when she said, "Please, will you join us for dinner tonight? We would love your company." "Sorry, but I have a report to the Hokage with my fellow Junin, plus I have to return home after." She nodded, mirroring her son's dejected expression. Her going on her toes to plant a gentle kiss on his cheek was his second surprise of the evening. Sasuke blushed as she brought him inside after lowering herself and grinning up at him while caressing his cheek. He awkwardly stood there, shook his head, and started to move. "Don't consider your student's mother in that manner. Don't consider your student's mother in that manner. Don't." All the way to the Hokage tower, he kept repeating the phrase. As he and the other Junin sensei stood in front of the third and village elders in the conference room, Naruto was all business. Anbu was silently arranging documents and placing files in front of him. When they were done, they bowed and vanished as fast as they had appeared. They were all stuck inside the chamber when the door locked and the seals momentarily illuminated. Fortunately, there were no military police around. The Junin sensei alone. The Hokage moved about in his chair. As he opened a file and skimmed its contents, everyone's attention was on him. "I have here before me a file on the 8 Junin sensei teams that I sent to Black River Village to conduct the Konoha silent dispatch test." He gazed upon the Junin. "Well then, let's see whose genin will remain soldiers. When you hear your team, please indicate pass or fail." Team 7. Pass. Team 8. The Hokage met Kurenai's gaze and said, "Pass." Before turning back to the sheet, he grinned. Team 10. Pass. Team 12 inches. Pass. Aoba grinned. Perhaps his squad would be able to pass the Chunin exam at last. Team Guy. Pass. Team 13. Fail. Team 14. Fail. Team 15 inches. There was a pathetic sigh. Fail. The Hokage put down his pen and made an X on the final box. He looked at the gathering while reclining on his chair. Not bad. 5 out 8 passed. I honestly expected worse. Nobody responded to that. They all sat silently, gazing blankly. Danzo sneered. That's an improvement, but I can't say it's not hard to improve on garbage. Kurenai tightened her teeth, awakened by her hot rage. Listen here, you pile of shit. We all. Naruto stopped her by slapping a hand over her mouth. Most likely, she would say something that she would come to regret. She resisted him for a while before calming down with quiet murmurs in her ear. However, she continued to gaze. Danzo gave it back indifferently. Hiruzen took a puff from his pipe. Kurenai. She stood at attention upon hearing her name. Hokage-sama. You and I will have a private chat later. I have interesting news about the way you handled your Hyuga during the test. It wasn't a request. She bowed slightly and nodded stiffly. The doors unlocked and the seals shone against the walls once more. As for the rest of you, dismissed. The Junin bowed as a group and started to shuffle out the door. Naruto stood there with a weathered eye raised. The third glanced at him when he remained motionless. Problem, Naruto? Naruto gave a slow nod. He tilted his head at the third, his Sharingan glowing a fiery red, you could say. Hiruzen gazed at him silently. After being silent the entire time, Homura turned to his former teammate and scoffed at Naruto. Hiruzen, please just arrest this boy. His insubordination knows no limits. The third merely raised a hand in denial of his request. Leave us. He slightly flared his chakra when Homura stammered. Both of you, leave us, now. Despite their advanced age, the two elders complied with the request, rose elegantly from their chairs, and silently passed Naruto on their way to the door. Danzo remained silent, but Homura felt compelled to speak up. I'll have you know, boy, that I— His skin paled slightly before he recoiled when the dual-colored eyes landed on his face. He scoffed, trying not to look foolish, and hurried out the door, slamming it behind him. Naruto silently looked back at the Hokage, who had not once averted his eyes. Old man, what? The third interrupted him, saying, that jutsu you used in the village, what was it called? Naruto scowled and remained silent for a short while. Rosin Bolt. The third repeated, Rosin Bolt. He gave his goatee a scratch. A Rasengan embedded with lightning chakra. Genius. Not even Minato in all his prowess could hope to accomplish such a feat. You ought to see Rosin Shuriken. Naruto thought to himself, but it wasn't the objective of talking about his jutsu. Listen, He interrupted him once more, saying, you know that Rosin Bolt killed a lot of villagers. Unfortunate souls, close enough were reduced to nothing but atoms, as the reports say. Naruto, tired of the interruptions, bit out, two Kyuubi Jinchuriki fighting called for desperate measures. The third reclined in his seat. He scowled and said, indeed. The sight of 17,000 shinobi marching through fire country would not be pleasant. That Sora boy, yes? I'm glad he's dead, or I would have been forced to mobilize our military. And that one who did the sealing, the boy's father, Kazuma, is dead, correct? Naruto said. He looked at the young man seriously and said, good, so tell me, Naruto, what I did to suffer this spout of ire from you, please? I know. It was Hiruzen's turn to be interrupted, and the pipe in his mouth nearly dropped out in amazement. Konohamaru can't contain the Kyuubi, can he? His chakra quickly started to rise as his gaze focused on Naruto's appearance. The god of shinobi started to get up from his chair and banged his palms on his wooden desk, leaving an indentation. Who informed you of that? He asked. Answer me, boy. Only after directly challenging the thirds did Naruto raise his own chakra levels to match theirs. Answer my question first, old man. The chamber cracked and the floorboards creaked due to the two conflicting chakra signatures. The strong chakra was felt by every body in the Hokage Tower, and the oppressive pressure almost brought them to their knees. The struggle of wills persisted until Anbu burst into the room, all of them pointing swords at Naruto's exposed back. The squad captain turned to face the Hokage when the two occupants failed to acknowledge their presence. My lord? He asked, keeping his gaze fixed on Naruto, seeking advice on how to behave. Before his chakra levels subsided and he slowly reclined in his seat, Hiruzen continued to stare at Naruto. The Anbu hesitated but complied, sheathing their weapons and bowing before leaving. Get out. The third took up his pipe, loaded it to the brim with tobacco, and lighted it with a chakra flash. He composed himself by puffing slowly before calmly observing Naruto. Before he talked, he exhaled several puffs of smoke. I'll answer your question, Naruto. But please, tell me first exactly how you acquired such information. Before relinquishing his tight form, Naruto eventually dropped his chakra levels after hearing his level tone. His hands were stuffed into his pockets. The third's eyes widened as he said, I spoke with the Kyuubi. My Sharingan allowed me to enter Konohamaru's subconscious, and there I spoke with the beast. It told me it would soon get out. After a moment of wide-eyed staring, the third sighed and removed his hat. He looked more like an elderly man than the strong leader he had just been as he ran a hand through his dulling hair and let out a sad sigh. You know, Naruto, at times like this I think, fuck, why did I ever accept this job? Why didn't I let some other dumb bastard get stuck in this Kami-forsaken shithole, and live out the rest of my life as a soldier who would eventually die on the battlefield? Naruto gazed without blinking. You have only yourself to blame for accepting it. After giving it some thought, the third gave in. Indeed, when Tobamaru-sensei bestowed the title onto me I was too hasty. He inquired. He groaned deeply and slumped in his chair, looking up at the ceiling with regret. I should have just given it to Danzo. Naruto was patient, but he got irritated when he remained silent. He bit out wearily, old man. When Hiruzen finally turned to face Naruto, his grizzled eyes filled with great emotion, causing Naruto to halt. You know he was only 2 when it happened. When the attack started. Naruto paid close attention. Minato needed a Jinchuriki. He was planning for your sister to be the one, but Kushina Kami, rest her soul, had a miscarriage. The Kyuubi would have destroyed Konoha. I couldn't allow that, so I gave him the next best choice. He drifted away as his stare reflected the distant memories. Naruto muttered, Konohamaru. Hiruzen gave a nod. Yes, my own grandson. The boy who had just watched his mother get crushed under their collapsing house. I gave him to Minato, and before I knew it I was holding Konoha's newest Jinchuriki. Naruto gave a headshake. But it all doesn't make any sense. What happened that night? How did the seal break? Dad's work, his genius, was perfect. How could it break when he was with her? Naruto would have missed his flinch if it weren't for the Sharingan. However, he noticed it. Hiruzen whispered, I don't know. Naruto was in front of him before he could blink. Crash. He scowled at the third with such intensity that the wooden table broke beneath the force of his fist. You're lying, old man. Tell me. He demanded to know the truth. The answers to all the questions that had been bothering him ever since that evening. He had been denied the truth for far too long, and he wasn't going anywhere tonight until he found out. Become Hokage and I'll tell you everything. Lightning started to crackle about Naruto's form as the whisper forced his chakra to burst out quickly. The third was pulled to Naruto's level by the scruff of his robe as his teeth mashed together beneath his mask. The Junin in front of Hiruzen glowed an icy blue in his right eye and burned an intense red in the other, and he observed without flinching while the Junin inhaled fiercely. If you kill me, you won't get your answers. Plus, an army would be after your head. Not even you can fight off 17,000 soldiers. Before releasing his hold and allowing the robes to escape his hands, Naruto tightened his grip until he could feel the pain. The third sank back into his chair. The Hokage, unfazed, brushed away any accumulated dust and smoothed out the creases in his robes. The third observed Naruto's actions critically as he paced the room like a furious tiger. Didn't you want to find about Konohamaru? Naruto stopped at the inquiry, but all it took was a glance to persuade the third to reveal his grandson's well-held secrets. I wanted for him to have a childhood. A long one. By the age of 7 we began his training to become Konoha's perfect weapon. Naruto nodded and raised his hands in frustration, saying, let me guess. Root. Motherfucking Root was always the culprit. He lived a double life, attending the academy and training in secret. I ordered him to take up a fake persona to not bring attention to himself. He grumbled. The day I announced his status, the civilian and many of the ninja population rejected him. They only saw a beast. And thinking of everything I've done, the least I could do was make him be honored as a hero. So I made a law. Hiruzen nodded once more. Is that why everyone is so sketchy when they talk to him? He shook his head and said, wow, isn't that supposed to be an S-class secret? Worst fucking secret I ever heard of. The jab was unnoticed by the third. But when he turned 9, time came for his more serious training. His Jinchuriki training. But he had failed spectacular and his body would suffer a great deal of pain. Our medics and scientists were baffled by this. We thought something was wrong with the seal. But no, the seal was perfect. His own body couldn't handle the strain. He sighed bitterly. So, Naruto asked, anticipating what was going to be said. He wished for his heart to stop racing. So we stopped his training. And sent him back to the academy full-time under 24-hour surveillance. He was to reveal nothing to no one. All we could do is prepare for the inevitable, and ready another candidate. Naruto believed he had heard incorrectly. What? Hiruzen let out a sigh. You must understand, Naruto, he begged. Billions of dollars went into his training, and when he failed it all, the money couldn't just go to waste. I was being pressured for a weapon. Konoha needed a weapon. So I offered the fucking next best thing. Naruto stammered. What did you do? He said, his eyes shining with tears. Kushina's baby was miscarriage, but the child was still alive but dying. We cultivated her stem cells from the umbilical cord and stored them. She died after, but it secured Konoha's future. All of our futures. Now, we can gene pool perfect candidates. Restart the Uzumaki line. With surrogates we can have your clan back in a less than 5 years. Naruto was having trouble breathing. He was fairly certain that his heart was missing a beat when it thumped against his chest. The elderly man was making a joke. He must be kidding. But when he saw the man's expression and realized that the nonsense he was spewing was real, he became uncontrollably angry. Please understand, Naruto, The force of the hit sent the third flying from his seat and crashing into the stone wall behind him. Anbu stormed into the room with his guns drawn and launched an assault right away. Naruto quickly pulled out his sword, which hummed through the air as it sliced through his opponents. He targeted for legs and wrists, lowering the elite squad like they were rookie genin, so the slices were just incapacitating rather than deadly. 5 seconds was not long enough. Bloody and bruised, the Anbu team sprawled on the ground, withering in agony. The Yellow Fang, resembling death in human form, stood guard over them, flicking his wrist to send blood flying from his sword. The captain touched his piece with his fingers. Alert! Alert! Code Black. I repeat, Code AC. He was knocked unconscious by a kick to the head, but the message had already been transmitted. The message was clearly grasped by a tail among Anbu. Naruto. Hokage is being attacked. Send everyone. And before he could blink, Anbu was all about him. Swords were poised and prepared to kill him if he moved at all. The elite force remained unyielding. Despite being greatly outnumbered, they quickly realized who they were facing, and some of them moved nervously. With his weapon ready, Naruto blazed his chakra without even hinting. His form was surrounded by lightning, and his strong chakra quickly surged. He raised his sword, grasped the handle, and ran his chakra through the blade. The fabled sword started to hum and light with chakra as he was ready to let off a. The third said, "Stand down." As he raised himself up in his chair and tended to his fractured jaw. He snapped it back into position with a crack. He barked once again when he saw that none of the Black Ops members were following his orders. "Stand down." Near him, an Anbu paused. "But my lord, I said stand down, now," he screamed in a tone that left no room for disagreement, and the Black Ops members lowered their weapons one by one. As he cut off the flow of chakra to his sword and silently sheathed it, Naruto gradually dropped his chakra levels, causing those near him to walk backwards and their forms to finally be able to breathe. He started to move toward the exit without even looking at the Hokage. He said, "Forgive me, Naruto. But I did what I must to secure Konoha's future," but Naruto disregarded him and carried on without stopping. Naruto's reflection in an all-black mask glared back at him as a body blocked his way out. There was no movement or smoke to suggest that the Anbu commander had suddenly materialized. The commander was a formidable figure, dressed entirely in black armor and wearing a maroon-crimson cloak. After a moment of intense looking, the commander quietly stepped aside to let him pass. As Naruto passed the perilous leader, he felt a gloved hand resting on his shoulder. "I'll be watching you." The voice-altering software made a spine-tingling sound, but the disembodied voice did not reveal which gender commanded the entire Black Ops unit. Unimpressed, Naruto waited patiently for the commander to withdraw the appendage before leaving silently as soon as the hand left his shoulder. Ignore this village. As Naruto advanced, the Konoha population divided like the Red Sea. Villagers who were too close to him fainted or lost their meals. He didn't stop to look at the several eyes following his shape as he moved on. He came to a sky-high condo while strolling around the village's wealthier neighborhoods. His vicious stare ran over the security guards, who were often on night patrol, as they attempted to blend in with the walls as he entered through the glass doors. He waited in silent rage for the elevator ride to end after getting inside and pressing the button that went to the penthouse. "I will never give you up. I will never fail you. I will never run away from you." The elevator song made him feel more worse, and he physically turned crimson. He struck out with his fist, denting the heavy iron next to him. Fortunately, the doors eventually opened, and he proceeded to a door he recognized. A seal shone as he placed his hand against the door and passed his chakra through it, causing the door to unlock on its own. As he entered his house, he saw that it was completely black and that all of the lights had been turned off. The big TV, which was showing some absurd film about cats battling dogs, was the only source of light. He removed his sandals and moved forward in silence as the door shut behind him. He stopped in front of a big leather L-shaped couch and watched his blonde beauty snore quietly in her sleep, temporarily forgetting his fury. His whole ninja hound team surrounded her. When he looked more closely, he saw that Pakun was the fortunate one curled up in her arms. After locating the remote, he switched off the TV and proceeded to the master bedroom. He opened the door to find a spacious king-size bed. The lacquered ebony bed was a rare import from Moon Country. Its headboards and handles were expertly carved in an ebony design that represented the Uzumaki clan mark. A rosy crimson outline completed the fashionable design. He was practically reminded of Konohamaru's subconscious as the sheets, which matched its outline, shone out nicely against the dark color. With a sigh, he crossed the snow-white carpeted floors and took a seat on his bed. He secretly thanked Michiru, the Prince of Moon Country, for his prosperity as he leisurely looked around his apartment. Yes, he was loaded. There were little sapphire-handled ebony drawers on either side of the bed. An enormous dresser with the same hues as its smaller counterparts was located on the opposite side of the room. Its sapphire handles sparkled just like the others, but it was expertly finished with a big square mirror. He was unwilling to begin with the main bathroom. For so little effort, all this wealth. Years earlier, he had been rewarded well for protecting the man's son during one of his missions. He also had sex with his attractive ex-wife. However, that was in the past, and he had long since moved past such kinds of behaviors. Even if he were the richest person on the planet, he would still be unhappy. He didn't care about any of this material stuff. Yes, having luxury and enjoying it was pleasant. However, he had come from modest beginnings and placed a higher importance on family ties than money. If he had no one to share it with, what good was it? His question was silently answered by soft fingers sliding through his hair. His view was overwhelmed with a lacy blue chemise. When Naruto saw that the silky material was transparent and that black clothing was visible underneath, he couldn't help but look. Her lovely face lost its smile as he gazed up into sparkling blue eyes. Her eyes grew worried as she pulled softly at his blonde hair. What's wrong? Naruto practically slumped against her, pushing his forehead on her tummy as the sound of her words released the strain in his tense muscles. Even for him, this night had been too much. He had been balancing on a thin line, but the chat with the Hokage simply knocked him off. To be honest, he had considered going rogue, slashing down any Anbu unfortunate enough to stand in his way and immediately killing the Hokage. The village would proclaim lockdown in roughly 60 seconds. Before those enormous gates closed, he had more than enough time to sneak into his flat, get all his belongings, bid farewell, and head deep into Fire Country's dense forest. But as soon as he thought of her, he erased the ideas. How was he going to abandon her? As her soft fingertips unzipped his heavy vest, the question kept repeating in his head. With his blade fastened to it, it fell to the ground and chattered. He silently raised his arms above his head so she could remove his long-sleeved black shirt. The necklace he had previously acquired from the Slug Queen herself became visible and began to twinkle when he was left wearing his skin-tight, sleeveless face mask shirt. She took a seat on the other side of his lap and ran her hands through his in that incredibly calming way. He merely stared at her for a few moments before answering, "Talk to me, Naruto-kun." What's wrong? As he removed his face mask and planted a kiss on her, he had an insight while his earlier query was still fresh in his thoughts. She lay down on the bed, his body ravishing hers with kisses, and, like the angel she was, she silently accepted his display of adoration. Clothes were thrown away, and soon they were guided through the night by the comforting feeling of two bodies merging in harmony. He responded to his own danger within as her groans filled the night and her fingers ran softly across his hair. He was unable to abandon her, not even if he made an effort. As its owner continued to shuffle along without pausing, the steady taps reverberated through the pitch-black hallway, piercing the deafening silence. The white and dark hues of his robes blended flawlessly with the surrounding darkness as they flapped gently with every step. Danzo hobbled down the dim corridors of his subterranean root base with one eye closed and an expressionless visage. A small child with an unhealthy pale complexion, whose face was as blank as his pale skin, trailed his master's shadow next to him. The tiny child, dressed in traditional root clothing, silently advanced while Danzo paused in front of a big iron door and opened it to let his master through. Danzo walked by him, silently shutting the door and escorting the sentry away while he bowed. Danzo entered without saying anything and kept moving on till he came across two soldiers who were whispering to each other. They promptly knelt down and bowed in front of him. His single sight, fixed on the heads of each veiled face, scanned their contours critically. As Danzo carried out his silent observation, they stood motionless as statues and waited expectantly. "Remove your mask." They immediately complied, taking off their white masks and raising their heads in unison to show their faces to his one eye. "Fu report." The male member of the pair acknowledged with a tilt of his head before starting to describe what he had just seen. Danzo frowned and squinted his eye, saying, "It is you suspected, my lord." "He knows." How did Hiruzen react? Fu's features remained expressionless. He spoke in an impersonal tone. "He let him go." Danzo scowled more deeply. Did Hiruzen release the boy? His thoughts were racing, trying to figure out why Hiruzen hadn't tried to kill him at that precise moment. He was undoubtedly too old to fight him, but he might have easily defeated him with the commander's presence and the Anbu's assistance. He was playing what game? It would be too risky to allow such knowledge to be openly disclosed and for him to learn less. His heart would be shaped by hatred, and he would want retribution. Fairness. Retaliation. Danzo was well aware of the perilous paths. He asked, what else did he find out? Fu blinked and said, he knows of the Kyuubi's vessel's weakness. Danzo's lone eye widened at the news. He entered the boy's subconscious and spoke with the beast. At last, he was discovering that the Sharingan was capable of more than just mimicking jutsu. Danzo gave a headshake. For letting him go, Hiruzen was undoubtedly a fool. Nevertheless, it was a remarkable achievement to be able to communicate with the beast by entering Konohamaru's subconscious. With just his Sharingan, he was able to violently restrict the beast's chakra despite having no Uchiha blood at all. Naruto posed a threat. What in the world had that monkey been thinking, though, for Hiruzen to allow him to instruct the Jinchuriki and the final Uchiha? And to consider that he would be able to visit the Naka shrine through his pupil. He resisted the want to sigh as he considered what would happen if he ever discovered the Sharingan's secrets. Danzo would arm his whole root force and launch an attack, consequences be damned, if he ever unlocked the Manekyo. With that eye, he would simply become invincible, adding to his already absurd power. As their lord cursed, the two root troops did not move. Danzo held onto his cane's wood so tightly that he nearly broke it in two. Konohamaru may have been the Hokage by now if he hadn't failed. Under his leadership, Konoha would be too strong for Naruto. When Konohamaru grew up, he was the one who started his training. Hiruzen wanted his grandson to have a childhood, but he wanted to start sooner. Oh no, Danzo could have turned the youngster into a raw weapon even if his Jinkujiriki training had failed. He would have been a force of nature due to his Sarutobi talent and hidden potential. That is, for as long as his body would last. Nevertheless, it was a squandered chance. Even the most skilled shinobi might have been able to save him and send him on missions that were too risky. However, Hiruzen's weak beliefs and soft heart prevented him from making the difficult choices. Hiruzen was devastated by the defeat and felt that it had all been in vain because he had tortured his godson for years. One of the god of shinobi's weaknesses was his own godson. Sad. Before long, Danzo's blank check was cut, his secret weapon was taken from him, and he was returned to the academy, where his abilities and intellect were allowed to deteriorate, compelled to endure the rest of his life until his body failed. Oh, what might have been? He could have given the youngster a unique seal that would have bound him to his every desire if he had had Konohamaru for a little while longer. And he would have launched a coup d'état and deposed Hiruzen if he had had the first Hokage's cells, Shisui's right eye, and a Jinchuriki at his disposal. He was positive that his former teammate would never hurt his own grandson. Naturally, the ensuing mayhem would have sparked a civil war in the Konoha. The village would eventually become weaker and many lives will be lost. All required sacrifices for the benefit of society as a whole. He would become the village's new leader. Led Konoha to triumph by ruling with a fiery will and a stone heart. It would mark the start of a new era. The Leaf's Age. Namikaze would have been quickly eliminated. Unfortunately, those were only fantasies, and the terrible truth finally arrived. Konoha has misplaced its weapon. Danzo did sigh and shake his head regretfully this time. He would never publicly acknowledge it, but that old monkey was a cunning one, to have used those cells. Even he had never considered that. Even more intriguing was the fact that he knew Hiruzen's former pupil would assist him. Naturally, not literally, Orochimaru would sooner die than assist any Konoha shinobi, let alone his former instructor. No, like the monkey he was, Hiruzen had been cunning. He had used Orochimaru's cloning notes and his deep understanding of human biology to recover what he could of the supposedly dying offspring from his former student's Konoha lab, which was meant to be destroyed. He was able to collect and store healthy, living Uzumaki cells. However, it had taken courage to do all that immediately following Minato's victory over the Kyuubi. Thinking back to the day he had found him in the sealing chamber, he grinned. He had never met his former teammate in his entire life, so he never would have imagined doing that. He had disclosed Shisui's Sharingan to confirm what he was seeing because he was so shocked. He occasionally found Hiruzen to be mysterious. In one moment, he seemed kind and grandfatherly, but in another, he was harsh and icy. He would never undervalue his opponent again after what he saw that evening, which he would have to recall till the day he died. Hiruzen's transgressions could not be permanently concealed. However, he couldn't either. Naruto is already furious with him. But it was risky to lie right in front of him. An extremely lethal risk. He hoped Hiruzen was keeping his secrets to himself. Because Naruto would pursue the two of them if he ever discovered the truth. He would murder everyone who knew what had actually transpired that evening, not simply kill them. The outcome would remain the same even if he and Hiruzen engaged in combat. Unfortunately, Danzo could acknowledge that. That's why he kept his root agents close at hand, constantly keeping a check on the fort's legacy. Years later, Hiruzen's supposedly limitless knowledge of human cloning remained unfulfilled, and Orochimaru had not left enough notes for it to be useful. The initial handful that were raised within a year soon perished. They were too weak to do anything but breathe as their bodies tore apart. Contain the Kyuubi, much less. To make the most of the Uzumaki cells, he had to deploy surrogates. However, only a small percentage of Konoha's female population matched the type gene pool candidate. They were tough, those Uzumakis. They even have better qualities in their cells. It makes sense why their men never pursued women from other clans. Their women were extremely powerful. Danzo therefore needed to be flexible. Why should Hiruzen be the only one with a private army in Uzumaki? He had to take if he desired those genes, a new strategy. He turned to face the lone female in the pair, and for a brief instant, his mouth curved upward into a tiny smirk before it disappeared as if it had never formed in the first place. He was all business, giving her his undivided attention while gazing into her eyes. Before speaking to him, she closed her eyes and lowered her head, asking, "Has any progress been made?" "No, Danzo-sama." An eyebrow went up, turning gray. "Elaborate." He uses a contraception seal whenever we're intimate." Danzo gave a tisk. The youngster was deserving of the title of Seal Master. However, he required outcomes. And now he needed them. He had been sending her in for a few months now, but nothing had come of it. He had no tolerance for failure. His one eye stared down at her, saying, "I want results. Failure is not an option." She made a bow. "Forgive me, Danzo-sama, but if I may, I wish to speak freely with your permission." He scowled. From where did this originate? He nodded stiffly after a tense interval of quiet. It takes time, my lord. A big step like this will take a substantive amount of consideration. And despite everything, he's very untrusting. I beg you to allow me more time, Danzo-sama." Her blonde hair cascaded over her head. Danzo attentively considered his rude seductress's remarks as he gazed at her. His brow furrowed in contemplation. He pounded his cane on the ground in determination after excruciatingly quiet moments, the sound penetrating the intolerable quiet. He looked at his sister and brother and said, "Make sure by the next time we meet, you're pregnant." His words were as hard as steel. "Or the next pair of soldiers to fight to the death will be you too." Danzo turned on his heel and limped away as they bowed profoundly, their heads touching the ground. The door opened for him without hesitation, and as the youngster shut the big door behind him, he discreetly looked at his little protege. His cane hit the steel floorboards as he walked forward silently. The young guy was awakened by his command, "Come, Sai." He followed his master in silence. The youngster was a skilled assassin even at such a young age. "I must start your training. I fear you might be my final contingency plan if everything fails." He had never failed to kill a target, demonstrating the effectiveness of his skills. Sai whispered softly, "Yes, Danzo-sama." Danzo ignored it, used to the boy's lack of feeling. He was the one who had instilled them in his impressionable mind. He would be able to detect the underlying uncertainty in the tone if he listened closely enough. Sai looked at his hand, blissfully oblivious to what was happening behind his back, and saw that it was trembling. "What is this?" Naruto turned a page in his book and strolled through the bustling streets of Konoha, his vision entirely veiled by the book's orange covers while curious eyes traced his shape in awe. Naruto moved carefully toward the Sarutobi compound, one hand tucked into his pocket and the other holding his book. He did assure Konohamaru that he would speak with the young genin. He may assume that the child regretted losing control and nearly killing him during their perilous meeting in Black River. They would then convene as a team at the training grounds. His mind meandered over the night before, his face fixed in a hard frown beneath the cover of his book. He was furious, but he suppressed his rage for the time being. He couldn't let thoughts of retaliation consume him since he had genin to concentrate on. The night before, he didn't even get any sleep. How could he? discovering that the man you had come to admire was distributing your deceased sibling's cells like candy. He had never experienced such an intense desire to murder in his life. Everything had been a question in his mind. What would take place? He could resolve this legally by taking his case to the Land of Fire Supreme Court, where he would argue that the Uzumaki clan, once Konoha's greatest ally, had been treated inhumanely for a long time. The clan of his mother. He had even made a compelling case, according to Riha. In addition, he had significant influence both inside and outside of Konoha and was well liked by the Fire Daimyo. His Sharingan burned beneath his headband. Legal settlement was not what he wanted. He was a fighter, and specialist in using violence, trained in the art of warfare and combat. The army slayer wanted to explode. The Yellow Fang had made him an S-rank battlefield monster. The law was reserved for nobility and politicians. Fuck all that nonsense about civilization. His desire was to murder. Destroy this abandoned village of Kami. Locate those monstrosities and use the thunderous roar to obliterate them. He would slaughter the third and the higher-ups until only flesh and bone remained, after which he would hack up their carcasses to try to recover their cells. When he realized he had been spewing murderous intent, he blinked. His tight posture eased, and his fast-paced heartbeat slowed. He let go of those ideas with a sigh. Eventually, rationality and the serious repercussions of such actions have to take hold. Konoha wouldn't simply slap him on the wrist and forgive him, even if he succeeded in killing the third. No way. Every village on the continent would be chasing him if he was declared a missing nin more quickly than the Raikage's body flicker. Is it possible for him to abandon his friends? His family members? Asuma was the third sole surviving son and one of his best friends. The man would not take his father's passing lightly, despite his disdain for him. And after all that his team has endured, could he simply abandon them? He slouched as he considered everything. That night, Riha's reasoning had been echoing in his head. His seething rage had been stoked by the quiet murmurs, which ultimately prevented him from igniting the coming civil war. Beneath his mask, Naruto let a tiny smile appear. She was his tiny ray of sunshine. She provided him with brightness throughout this difficult period, almost like a beacon of hope. He told him everything that had happened that evening. She listened intently to everything he said, her eyes even widening hilariously when he described using his sword to go through the Anbu like butter. He even boasted in jest that he had used a mean right punch to send the Hokage flying. In response, she throttled him. Squeezing life from his throat, she yelled, "You fucking idiot! You hit the Hokage! You piece of shit Bakachinko Aho Akuchi Kouno!" He would have been smiling till his face became red as his tender-mouthed sweetheart called him every word in the book if it weren't for the tiny hands compressing his windpipe and his face going blue from suffocation. When she was angry, damn, she was hot. He chuckled to himself as he idly touched the area of his neck where her fingertips had been. When she got angry, she was hot, but she was also extremely powerful. It almost brought back memories of his mother's angry outbursts. The idea made him cringe. Even his dad didn't want to be in that situation. He swiftly put his book down and tucked it into his utility bag as he stiffened for a brief while and lost his smile. The people in the Konoha area continued to go about their daily lives. The blazing afternoon sun created humid conditions, and the occasional shinobi could be observed going about their business. There was nothing unusual. Throughout his career, Naruto's senses were the one thing he had complete faith in. Naruto had complete faith in his intuition because of his keen sense of hearing and sensitive nose. For good reason, there was no such thing as a paranoid shinobi. His instincts informed him that he was currently being pursued. Naruto continued to move forward while slowly tilting his head and hiding a quick glance out of the corner of his eye with his long bangs. He observed regular individuals going about their daily lives behind him, and not a single one caught his attention as suspicious. His eyes narrowed as they focused on the roofs, and he looked up. Naturally, the height advantage would offer substantial surveillance and concealment. In order to avoid drawing attention to himself, he shifted his focus ahead while maintaining a steady pace and relaxed form. His lone eye scanned the area, searching for anything that could serve as a diversion. Some construction workers were moving slowly down the street with bulky loads of dirt in an act of kami. Beneath his mask, Naruto smiled and subtly directed chakra onto his index finger. A tiny ball of chakra began to whirl. With a flick of his finger, the ball flew through the air without anybody seeing, struck the dirt bag, and exploded in the middle of the road, shocking both shinobi and nearby people. People in the vicinity began to cough due to a dense cloud of smoke, and they swiftly fled the cloud of dirt. With his hands stuffed in his pockets, Naruto strode through the cloud carefree. For a moment, his shape was concealed, and then he came out, brushing away any dust that had gathered. He went on, taking out his book and adopting his usual slump. As soon as they arrived, the military police cleared the area of spectators. When the worker, covered in dirt, tried to explain how the bag suddenly exploded in his hands, one of the cops gave him a tongue lashing. He looked completely unhappy. The distortion swiftly shot to the roofs, but no one saw it. Naruto's shadow clone, concealed by the transparency jutsu, observed the original leisurely walking along the street. When he was on ground level, his lone eye darted across the rooftops in an attempt to capture the presence he sensed. He looked up at the rooftops, but all he saw were ordinary buildings and the odd shinobi. He was good, whatever he was. There was nothing unusual on the roofs, despite his skill at detecting chakra. Nothing moves or flickers, just the wind blowing. There, if it weren't for the layer of dust rising from the dust cloud, he would have missed. It overflowed onto a roof and landed like a layer of sand on the concrete. With a small smile, he saw footsteps before the dust was blown away by a light breeze, causing it to flicker into the wind. Bingo, Naruto thought to himself. The person employing that camouflage jutsu failed to consider their surroundings. Pay attention to your surroundings at all times. The world quickly came into full focus as his palm rose to rest on his headband. When he spotted the figure's unique chakra flow, his eye narrowed. Naruto could tell the figure was crouching and focused on his original as he moved through the streets by the way his chakra flowed. His Sharingan whirled quickly in his sight, sharpening until the shape of the figure was clearly discernible. Naruto was soon able to observe how the figure's outline worked. Beneath his mask, his mouth made a line. He vanished in a body flicker as he started to repress his chakra. He was behind the figure in an instant, as if he didn't realize he was there. His shape was once again visible to the unaided eye after he stopped the chakra flow to the transparency jutsu. The figure remained crouching, blissfully unaware of the threat, as the real Naruto carried on with his leisurely stroll. He held up his hands in time to see a familiar blonde blur crash into him as his figure paused in the distance. Naruto remarked carelessly, "Lucky bastard, isn't he?" He looked at the woman he was holding. "Look at that ass." In a second, the figure leapt to his side, drawing his tanto and increasing the gap between them. His silhouette was now easier to see up close, and it was evident that he was a guy. With his knees bent and his torso balanced, the man spread his legs slightly. Naruto saw that it was a flawless exercise of balance, allowing the mysterious man to quickly attack or, if needed, run away. "You might as well drop the jutsu," Naruto said coolly. "I can see you perfectly." The figure refused to comply and instead opted to maintain his composure, his mask-covered expression never deviating from Naruto's at ease. The guy seemed to consider his alternatives as he moved his head slightly. With the sound of a sliding metal, Naruto's hand settled on the sword's hilt and began to carefully pull the blade. Naruto saw the figure's fingers tighten around his tiny tanto, but he did not respond when he said, "Why are you following me?" He could clearly see the image of his next action with every noticeable change in his muscles and every twitch of tension in his body. The figure remained curled, but his hand moved covertly to his purse. Before the figure could drop the smoke bomb in his palm, he blitzed forward with his sword ready for a blow as the tomos spun quickly before slowing in his eye. His free arm slashed out to stop the arm holding the bomb, but his sword blow was deflected. Any onlooker would notice the odd sight of Naruto seemingly gripping nothing but air if they took the time to look. The figure hissed as Naruto ran lightning chakra through his arm, disrupting his chakra flow and causing the camouflage jutsu surrounding his form to drop. He was unprepared for the hand that grabbed his neck, leaving him momentarily shocked. With a stunning display of unadulterated strength, Naruto narrowed his eyes, flipped the now identified root agent, and slammed him into the ground. The entire rooftop was engulfed in a dense haze as the smoke bomb he was holding burst from impact. As the smoke expanded into the air, Naruto sensed the quickly close chakra signatures approaching to investigate. He looked at the root agent, who was astonished, and bided his time until the seal he had applied to his neck solidified. Ignoring the agent's fight against the foot squeezing his throat, he stomped on the man's neck violently, raised a palm in the ram sign, and concentrated his chakra. He had to close his eyes in concentration as he felt his chakra finally grasp out to seal he had placed, and in his mind the picture of a room appeared, the seal placed on the wall pulsing as his chakra connected with it. As the smoke cleared, an Anbu patrol swiftly arrived on the site, gazing bewildered at a deserted rooftop. Glancing at the rooftop that had abruptly burst into smoke, Riha asked, "What was that?" A group of Anbu emerged a few seconds later as the smoke cleared. Naruto cast a sluggish gaze at the roof in question. "Ma, just some kids playing a prank." Riha remained silent, merely gazing inquisitively at the roof before returning her focus to the streets and casually observing passers-by. "So, how was your mission?" Naruto inquired, putting an arm around her. Riha absently stroked the arm over her shoulders while humming to herself. She groaned and said, "Just a plain old B rank. It was really dull. I had to command a group of Chunin on a patrol at military base, you know, the one close to the capital." With a nod and a chin stroke, Naruto said, "That does sound boring." She shook her head, laying it lightly on Naruto's arm, and said, "I don't know what was worse, the mission itself, or the whole squad of Chunin that were constantly trying to flirt." Naruto merely laughed a little. "Flirting? Huh, I mean, have you seen your ass? You can't blame them." Quote. Glancing up at him with baby blues, Riha chuckled and said, "They can look but no touching is allowed. Only one person gets that privilege." They went on in quiet until Riha became alert. Naruto smiled and said, "Lucky me." He leaned down and kissed her, not caring that his mask was still on. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Well, I'm heading to the Sarutobi clan compound," Naruto said, looking down at her. "I have no idea where you're heading." She pouted at him and said, "Can't I come, Naru-kun?" He rolled his eye and shook his head slowly before nodding in agreement, which made her smile. Before long, the big gates of the Sarutobi clan entrance with their unique clan emblem were visible. As the two blondes stood in front of the magnificent gates, the kanji for monkey was displayed with pride. Naruto bowed courteously to the gate guards, who saluted him before gesturing for him to pass. One of the dark-haired guards stopped Naruto in his tracks. "Sorry ma'am, but I cannot allow you entrance." Riha scowled and held Naruto's gaze as he sheepishly stroked his cheek. "I'm sorry, Riha-chan." He laughed at her narrowed eyes and said, "Just chill out here for a bit, I won't be long. They don't allow strangers and I'm short of an honored guest." Despite her pout, she nodded in agreement and watched Naruto advance into compound while crossing her arms beneath her chest. With his hands stuffed in his pockets, Naruto strolled around the stunning Sarutobi clan grounds, which stretched almost 3 kilometers and were among the biggest in Konoha, second only to the Hyuga. Trees covered the grounds, and in the distance, Naruto could see a sizable jungle forest that appeared to be home to some of the monkeys that the clan bred. His sightseeing was cut short when he arrived at the main house, a massive mansion adorned with the clan's emblem. With a rich history dating back to Konoha's founding, the main house stood proud and imposing, its beauty truly magnificent as the red oak glistened in the afternoon sun. The wood was personally crafted from the first Hokage, Hashirama Senju, as a gift to the clan. The loud voices that could be heard all the way outside were what had stopped him. "I don't care. I don't care if you hear me." Naruto had seldom heard the young Sarutobi so furious, but that sounded a lot like Konomaru. "Boy, watch what you say. This clan is led by me. Go if you don't like it." That was the third's gruff voice, even louder than Konohamaru's, yelling back with equal ferocity. An enraged Konohamaru walked out of the mansion after the front doors were kicked open. "Fine old man." The third, dressed in his Hokage robes but without his characteristic hat, followed him. "Boy, this is hardly the end of the conversation." Konohamaru. Red eyes looked back at Hiruzen as Konohamaru bared his teeth. Hiruzen attempted to grab his arm but was shoved back and almost knocked to the ground by an angry shove. "Old man, don't fucking touch me." Klansmen soon surrounded their figure as a result of their boisterous words, and guards attempted to calm the third, but he dismissed them. "Listen here, and listen well," he said, pointing a finger at the irate Jinchuriki. "I refuse to be humiliated in front of my clan," he said, gesturing to the home. "You have two options. Either return inside and we can conclude this argument amicably, or you may act like a child and be restrained with force." Before his crimson eyes seemed to glow and his body started to tremble, Konohamaru stared at him numbly. "Listen to yourself, old man. You give the impression that the nonsense you're spreading is true." "Listen, Konohamaru, I do what I must for this," Hiruzen moaned. Those surrounding the third retreated in fear as Konohamaru marched directly into his face, saying, "No, you listen, old man." With a finger prodding his chest, he accentuated each phrase, "Fuck you. Fuck Danzo. And fuck this piece of shit village. Finally, he exploded with another thrust, which the third was ready for as he nearly retreated. Hiruzen squinted. Take care, my young grandson. I won't hesitate to charge you with heresy. Konohamaru gave a sardonic smile. His voice trembled as he said, yeah, of course you would treat family like that. He turned on his heel and stomped away from the third, missing the way the elderly man winced. And no wonder Dad left, he exclaimed. Members of Sarutobi yelled at the act of disrespect and appeared prepared to step in, but the third merely raised his hands to stop them. Naruto's form was captured by Konohamaru, who then moved slowly to stand in front of him. His body was trembling and his eyes had changed from red to teary. The tiny child buried his head against his vest and sobbed as Naruto silently put his arm around him. Before their eyes met, Naruto looked at the third and noticed the elderly man observing the two. After a few moments of intense staring, the third broke eye contact and returned to the main house. Without saying anything, Naruto pointed Konohamaru in the direction of the gates before turning to face the boy who was sobbing. Konohamaru silently shook his head and used his long scarf to wipe away his tears. You want to talk about it, Ko? He asked. Eventually, they came to the clan gates in silence. The clan heir's condition immediately frightened the guards, but Konohamaru dismissed their worries. Riha was waiting calmly, leaning on the clan walls for support, but as soon as she saw the two, she became excited. She approached the two and said, Hey Konohamaru-kun, how's it going? But her smile vanished as soon as she saw his weeping eyes. What's wrong, Ko-kun? The little genin did not respond, instead attempting in vain to use his scarf to wipe away his seemingly never-ending tears. Riha looked at Naruto, but all he could do was shrug. What took place? Telepathically, she asked. Naruto responded, he and the old man were having a serious argument. It was really nasty. Riha merely nodded before giving the young child a gentle embrace and caressing his dark hair while he started to tremble and cry silently. His body appeared to triple in her arms as his arms gently settled around her waist. As she gently ran her fingers over his hair and held him close to her, she calmed his sobs. She lowered her head so that only him could hear her whisper. Her hand made little circles on his back and said, Let it out, Ko. His shaking stopped and his sobbing eventually subsided. Riha saw Naruto's raised eyebrow over the top of his head and giggled quietly at his perplexity. A touch of a woman, she said. Konohamaru released his hold on her waist and withdrew from her warm embrace when she felt him stir a little. She gave him a soft smile and then caressed his cheek. You feel better now, Ko-kun? The genin nodded despite blushing from humiliation. As he watched the young genin silently savor Riha's gentle touches, Naruto repeated his previous query, You want to talk about it, Konohamaru? He said in a whisper, The old man. He wants me to start my duties as the heir for the clan. Beneath his mask, Naruto scowled. The clan heir was actually the juvenile Sarutobi. His status in youth could only indicate one thing. Naruto concluded, He wants you to marry. Konohamaru said, He wants to set up an arranged marriage for me when I turn 16. Even more, he wants when I become a chunin to quit shinobi life and become a full-time clan heir. He grinned. That's when I told him to go fuck himself. With a pained sigh, Naruto fought the need to march back inside the Sarutobi compound. Then he gave it some thought. The Kyuubi was too strong for Konohamaru's body to contain. Eventually, something uncontrollable would erupt. From within his thoughtscape, he recalled the Kyuubi's statement, his mind is strong but his body is weak. The third was likely attempting to make his life worthwhile since he was aware that the inevitable will occur. Naruto was able to comprehend that. He wanted his grandchild to live before his death, but he had to watch him slowly pass away. Torture was what he was about to endure. He could clearly recall how much suffering the young genin had endured simply by gaining access to the chakra cloak. However, it appears from his expression that Konohamaru was unaware of his illness. Kono. Naruto stopped himself. He lacked the courage to tell him. At least not at this time and with such public exposure. His determination tightened as he stared into those huge brown eyes. He refused to let it happen. He could envision the seal his father had given his life to put on him as he looked down at his stomach. He would only need Jiraiya's key. That precise moment, Naruto silently vowed that Konohamaru would survive. He would see to it that. He grinned and gave the boy's spiky hair a loving rub. Konohamaru gently nodded before a tiny smile appeared on his face. Cheer up, Ko. Don't worry about that stuff, I'll take care of everything, okay? Naruto smiled. Konohamaru nodded and turned to face Riha, who had been politely silent the entire time. Now, let's head to the training ground. We're already late for a team meeting. You coming, Riha-chan? She gave Naruto a signal after grinning. I don't know, Kokun, you'll have to ask your sensei. Naruto sighed as his large brown eyes turned to face him. He agreed, saying, fine. The genin smiled up at Riha, who smiled back. To Naruto's pleasure, the genin leaned down to plant a gentle kiss on his cheeks, smiling when his face flushed. With Naruto reading his book and Konohamaru holding hands with Riha, who laughed as he told her some jokes, they all started to stroll together. Out of the corner of his eye, Naruto gazed at them and gave them a kind smile. Konohamaru seems to require the touch of a lady. According to his paperwork, the young boy witnessed his mother being crushed beneath their collapsing house during the Kyuubi attack. After leaving for the regions of his summoning, his father had been absent for years. He had asked the third about it before, but the elderly man wasn't prepared to discuss losing another son, especially because his last son didn't appreciate him. And the man had departed because of his father, based on what he had heard. Despite having his own clan, Konohamaru was undoubtedly subjected to covert rejection and contempt due to his status. He had noticed how several members of his own clan were staring at him. They had a powerful expression of fright in their eyes. Naruto turned to face the young genin and said, Sensei. He trailed off, looking at Riha, who gave him a gentle grin. Weren't we supposed to talk about the... Don't worry, I know Ko. The young genin smiled back at her despite jumping at the voice in his thoughts. Naruto asked, you want to talk about it? He had nearly forgotten, but he wouldn't stop the tiny child if he wanted to. Naruto nodded as he approached Riha and entwined her free hand with his, enabling her to connect their minds. The picture of the three of them going hand in hand depicted a small family, but no one appeared to notice. Okay, let's talk. So, do you recall what transpired? Naruto began. Konohamaru slumped as he recalled what had happened, softly shaking his head. I can recall bits of it, but not all of it. I was engaged in combat with that boy. Wait, how could he possess the Kyuubi's chakra? Naruto squinted. On the day it attacked, his father sealed some of the Kyuubi's chakra into him. Konohamaru's jaw remained open in disbelief as his eyes appeared to fade into the past. Seeing his expression, Naruto nudged him gently. Konohamaru, oh, I see, where was I? Furious. I was starting to become upset. Extremely irate. I sensed a great deal of malice and hostility. I intended to murder him. His eyes widened as he looked at Naruto. You can suppress the Kyuubi's chakra because you came and used those chains. Naruto gave a nod. Yes, it's a unique skill of mine. Konohamaru appeared to be in awe. He frowned and said, wow, that's so cool, sensei. After that, everything became dark. I am unable to recall anything. What took place? Quote. Naruto let out a sigh. You entered a four-tailed state. Konohamaru winced. You lost all control and reason and attacked me. Naruto looked him in the eyes and asked, Did I hurt you? Before choosing to tell the truth. No, I was harmed by the Kyuubi, not by you. Hands almost fell off due to corrosion. Konohamaru gave a tense smile in response to his remarks, but then his eyes filled with fear and he lost his composure. How about Sora? You killed him. The image of the malnourished child was etched in his memory for all time. Riha supported Konohamaru by putting an arm around him as he collapsed into her. Don't forget Konohamaru, you had to kill him anyway. Naruto stated. In any case, he would have perished that evening. Konohamaru had a dejected expression. However, I am aware of the devastation I may cause in my four-tailed state. I mean, didn't I come dangerously close to killing you? Quote. Naruto rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Ma, it's nothing worse than what Riha-chan can do, he smirked as he met her squinted gaze. He gestured to Riha to emphasize his point. Talk about vicious. I'll take on a tailed beast any day, rather than having to come home and deal with that. As Naruto went on, Riha's eyes narrowed to slits and Konohamaru laughed. I mean, you should see her in the morning. That's a sight I wouldn't wish on my most hated enemy, she said, interrupting the telepathic exchange as her temper started to flare. Konohamaru gradually started to move away from the enraged-looking blonde. I always thought rumors of women looking terrible in mornings was untrue, but the first time I saw it for myself I thought, hot damn. Did a severe case of fugly take a shit on your face while I was asleep? He glanced at her. Had to scramble for some toilet paper to get that stuff off, right, Riha-chan? Crazy. In an instant, two people emerged from a spatial void, one tripping on his feet and the other striking the ground violently. After a few moments of self-steadiness, Naruto's shadow clone shook his head gently. Geez, I'm still sloppy on the landing. Using his momentum, the agent he had transferred rolled to his feet. He lunged for his Tonto, but as Naruto pushed him to the ground on the rooftop, he realized he had dropped it. With his blade sheathed and his Sharingan glowing in the shadowy chamber they were in, Naruto cracked his knuckles menacingly. He bared his teeth beneath his mask and said, "Well, now it's just me and you." No interruptions. The agent took a moment to look around and noticed that they were in a big room that looked like an apartment. There were no windows or other distinguishing features, and the gray walls were empty. There were a few simple couches and a tiny coffee table in the middle of the space. He could see a tiny kitchen behind Naruto. The agent finally said, "Where have you transported me?" in a voice that the speech-altering software in his mask was unable to identify. He was aware that whatever jutsu the Junin had employed had been space-time, as they had traveled here in the blink of an eye after entering a dark abyss of some kind. Naruto moved ahead slowly. "Wouldn't you like to know?" the agent asked, slowly retreating with each step Naruto took before being abruptly stopped when his back struck a door. The spy only needed Naruto to stop moving in order to open the door and jump out. But as he plummeted into an unending black emptiness, his eyes widened and his mouth opened in a silent scream. He turned to look behind him and saw the blonde's quickly disappearing face peeking from the entrance of what appeared to be an apartment building floating in the never-ending darkness. He noticed a necklace of pure gold encircling his ankle and a flash of sparkling gold. The agent attempted to cut the metal by palming a kunai and passing his chakra through it, but it appeared to be nearly impenetrable. The chain was getting shorter and the floating apartment was getting closer, so his efforts were futile. Before long, he was dragged up to the doorway and left hanging by his ankle while a smug Naruto looked down at him. "Well, to answer your question, we're in a pocket dimension. I must say you're the only bastard who ever jumped. Most poor bastards were just thrown out the door." He cocked his head. "The void is infinite, so sometimes I hear them scream for a long time." When the agent hurled his kunai, Naruto just tilted his head, letting the blade pass by without causing any injury. When the agent completed using a replacement with the kunai he had just thrown, his Sharingan narrowed as he noticed the rush of chakra and he turned in time to prevent the blow to his head. In response, the agent grabbed his arm, flipped Naruto, and used the momentum to toss him out the door. "You're good." With two chains flashing out and fastening to the ends of the door, Naruto threw his hands forward. The agent's eyes widened beneath his mask as Naruto used his chains to force himself forward. Before he could react, he was speared, causing him to lose consciousness. Both of them fell into the apartment. Naruto used his momentum to roll the agent and then slid to his feet, throwing the man against the wall. Before launching himself into a furious taijutsu combat with Naruto, the agent struck the wall with his feet first, strengthening his legs with chakra. Naruto dodged the agent's forward jab and launched himself skyward with an uppercut that sent the man hurtling. The agent used the blow's force to flip himself and land on his feet. Before he could react, Naruto appeared in front of him and kicked him, sending him falling against the stone walls. The agent's eyes grew wide beneath his mask, and he ducked just in time to avoid the fist that crashed through the wall where his head had been. He palmed a kunai and sprang forward, but the weapon was stopped by a hand. In addition to smashing a fist on the pale mask and sending the man flying into the couches with a spinning kick, Naruto's knee raised to knock the knife out of the man's fingers and into the air. Without pausing, he raised his hand, caught the knife as it dropped into his open palm, and spun it idly while observing the man as he stumbled to his feet. The agent fingered the long crack that had developed in his mask and said, "As I mentioned, you're good. Really good, but I'm better." Naruto sent the knife flying with a flick of his wrist, and the agent managed to duck just in time to avoid getting his head pierced. Naruto saw the man slowly stand up, his body gasping with effort. "Why don't you just give up? You can take off your mask and let me torture you, or you can continue this fight resulting in me kicking your ass sideways. Then I torture you." The agent reached for his utility pouch as soon as he realized he was waging a loose war. He noticed Naruto holding up a little brown sack and shaking it naively back and forth when he felt nothing. Missing something, Naruto prepared himself as the agent darted forward, but his eyes furrowed as the man abruptly turned and ran frantically for the door. The jerk desired to end his own life. Because of Naruto's unstoppable speed, a chain burst out of his hand and ensnared the man before he could get to it. Naruto used all of his might to tug on the chain, using his own momentum against him to propel the man in his direction. Until the man could even gasp, a fist struck his mask, breaking it with the power and sending him hurtling through the air until he cracked into the concrete walls. After carefully dusting himself down and lowering his arm to retract his chain, Naruto started to go forward slowly. He stepped in front of the man who appeared to be unconscious and was laying face down on the ground. The man was lifted into the air by another chain that slowly emerged from his arm and wrapped around his neck. His head hung down, and his auburn hair cascaded below. His lips were bleeding from his earlier blow, and his face was wounded. Naruto had to control his chain to prevent the man's neck from snapping as his eyes narrowed to slits. Danzu's #1 lackey, unaware of the mess that had marred the living room, he silently turned on his heel and started to make his way to his torture chamber. As Fu approached a big door and pushed his hand on it, allowing his chakra to flow, the chain maintained its hold, dragging him along. A seal appeared on the door, and it opened to reveal a dimly lit room with a solitary wavering light bulb and a little chair. Moving ahead, Naruto willed his chain to place the unconscious man in his specially designed torture chair. He linked the man to the chair, holding him in place with the chakra-reinforced metal arm and leg straps. He gave him a brief glance before flashing out his hand and giving the man a hard slap to bring him back to consciousness. Fu stirred a little, then opened his eyes and fixed them on Naruto. Naruto grinned and said, "Hope you had a nice nap, sunshine. 'Cause I'm about to fuck you up." Fu glanced down at his soon-to-be torturer with emotionless amber eyes. Naruto's smile vanished, and he stared at the man blankly. The wavering lamp that briefly accentuated his features before letting the darkness cast a shadow over his face made his Sharingan glow in the dark all the more ominous. He began slowly, making his way around the chair, saying, "You know, when people torture, they always tend to get physical. They usually start with the little parts. Fingers, toes, eyes, mouth, roughly all the small stuff. That's usually to soften them up. I can personally say it's always the weak-minded that have the loose tongues." He walked slowly, circling the defenseless victim like a stalking shark. "Then there's the strong-willed type. Those who you would classify that don't break under conventional means." Observing the man's flickering gaze, he grinned. "Those types can go through days of physical torture and they still won't talk." He ceased to confront the man. "It's quite simple, really. It's a testament to their power of will to endure and turn suffering to their own advantage. That's why most prisoners are simply killed, because they simply can't be broken. The worst mistake a torturer can ever commit is starting with the body. When you can cause extreme misery to others without ever resorting to physical torture, you are at your most dangerous." Naruto has a complete understanding of human psychology. You can control someone's spirit by attacking their mind. He recalled his brief time under the man's supervision and thought about what Ibiki had said. Fu's head was tapped by a finger. "I, on the other hand, do not rely on such crude physical measures. I start with the mind. The body can't exist without the mind." His smiled. "The mind breaks, the body will follow." His Sharingan shone. "You root are said to be strong-willed, having the mindset of perfect tools. Well, let's find out how much you can endure." Naruto could see that Fu was starting to perspire, but he remained silent. His Sharingan noticed the raised pulse when he looked down at his wrist. He gave the man a sly smile and pointed to the surrounding walls. His Sharingan slowly whirled and said, "These walls are layered with seals that heighten genjutsu." When the word was mentioned, Fu slammed his eyes shut, but Naruto simply grinned softly. "With my Sharingan you could almost say that in here I have my very own Tsukuyomi." They had already made eye contact. A little too late. As the two guys gazed at one another, Fu's body froze and his eyes snapped wide. Fu's body jerked, and Naruto's face wrinkled. You know he was a Yamanaka. This would be a little difficult. For several minutes, there was a gazing contest, with Fu's body jerking slightly and Naruto's eyes twitching every now and then. As time went on, Naruto's eyes began to twitch more and more, and soon his brow was starting to perspire. Not that Fu was in much better shape. His eyes were twitching dangerously, and his body was drenched in sweat despite his blank features. The struggle for mind penetration continued for an hour. Fu has a strong intellect that was taught to keep off any outside influences. Naruto had attempted to imitate a particular Uchiha, mimicking his fluid approach and meticulously dissecting his thoughts. However, Itachi had always been a genjutsu master, and Naruto was aware that there was no comparison. He proceeded in his own manner. Fu's mouth opened in a mute cry as his mind was brutally assaulted, but he remained silent. He started to tremble as his mental foundation started to crumble since his mental toughness was unable to withstand the raw brute force of Naruto's blows. As he carried out his terrible attack, Naruto's eyes contracted and his Sharingan glowed. Nearly. The man was breaking, and he could feel it, being under his control. It would only require a bit more time. The agent's features could no longer maintain the blank condition, and he gritted his teeth. He was a stubborn one. Admirable, yet stupid. Naruto almost used all of his chakra in a final attack on the man's psyche because he was tired of having to put up with this for so long. Fu screamed in agony as his mental blocks shattered, causing a blood vessel in his head to break, and his eyes enlarged and his nose started to bleed. As the man collapsed into unconsciousness, Naruto smiled. Fu opened his eyes slowly and then closed them in agony, recalling the brutal mental attacks he had just endured. His body felt as though it had just finished a marathon, and his form was panting. He raised his head slowly, taking in his surroundings. Even though he was still seated, his surroundings had drastically changed. He looked about in bewilderment, staring at the empty room until he heard loud shouting. The voice said, "No, I won't allow it," but he couldn't identify it. This voice, lower but with a lethal tone, said, "Be reasonable. This is for the greater good." Fu recognized his master's voice right away. He heard what sounded like a scoff followed by a sigh. "They're just children, Danzo. How could you want to do this to innocent lives? I understand your concern, Inoichi. But these two are very promising. Their talents would be wasted in the academy. Root will allow them to flourish and become perfect soldiers for Konoha." Inoichi let out a sigh. "Kami, Danzo, listen to yourself for 1 second. Does the Hokage even know about your child soldiers?" For a short while, there was silence. "Namikaze will soon be dead in a few years. He won't be a threat." What? What the hell are you talking about? Is Minato's life in danger? Answer me. He said in a smug tone, "You have no need to worry. Namikaze is a thorn in both of our sides and I gave him some information that he needed." What have you done, Danzo? "I did what I had to do survive. It was either my life or his." "What the fuck are you talking about, Danzo?" Fu sensed the Yamanaka clan leader was getting ready for battle when he felt a buildup of chakra. Danzo asked in a quiet voice, "Are you threatening me with lethal intent, Inoichi? Answer me." He experienced a momentary chakra spike and a shuffling of movement. From Danzo this time, he sensed the disruption of Inoichi's chakra through his limited senses. Nearly if he was. "Forget about this conversation. If we're lucky things will go smoothly and the master will have the Kyuubi under his control." Another rustle of movement was heard. "Good. Now call the children." With a sigh, Inoichi let out his voice. "Fu, come here please. And bring your sister too." There were the sounds of small feet rushing, getting closer, and then stopping. "Inoichi-sama." The sound of his voice made Fu wince. "Who's this?" Once more, there was a deep quiet. Inoichi sounded broken as she said, "Just follow him, children." As their footsteps approached the room he was in, the door opened and a man and two small bodies entered, making Fu wince. Amber looked at his 7-year-old self in disbelief as the little child appeared to be approaching him. Reluctantly, his younger sister followed him. As the two siblings moved through him as if he were invisible and leaned against the wall behind him, Fu's eyes grew wild. Danzo, who appeared younger, retyped the bandages around his head and shut the door. The limp that afflicts his elder years did not affect his earlier form. Two unidentified persons stood next to him. The three were all dressed in black. He said, "Hello children. My name is Danzo." Fu gave a nod and then greeted her back. He pointed to the blonde with blue eyes next to him and said, "I'm Fu. This is my sister. Say hi." It appeared as though the tiny child curled up on her brother's clothing. Hi. Danzo fought the need to scowl. Such conduct would require prompt discipline. Still, he grinned. With one eye sweeping over their faces, he cocked his head and said, "It's a pleasure to meet the both of you. I have come before you two today, to recruit the both of you to my private Anbu faction." Fu looked at his sister, then squinted at Danzo. "Why would you want us? We're just starting the academy," he said, furrowing his brow. "I mean, we're only kids." Danzo gave a faint smile. "Yes, you are just children. But in time you will grow. I will train you till you stand as adults, perfect soldiers unmatched in all areas of the shinobi arts. True soldiers of Konoha, you would be doing your village a great service." Fu appeared to be starstruck and had huge eyes. He looked to his sister and said, "Wow, that sounds so cool. What do you think, sis?" Danzo grinned as the young girl reluctantly nodded while gazing at him. Splendid. His two guards trailed after him as he motioned for them to follow. When they came out of the room, the clan head's red eyes were staring at them with an unidentifiable expression. "They have agreed, Inoichi. I'll be taking them." He passed the silent man without saying anything, but he was halted when he felt a hand on his shoulder. When the hand left his shoulder, Danzo nodded silently and took a step forward, saying, "Take care of them, they're my sister's only children." The two kids were drawn to Inoichi's quiet murmur as the intimidating agents trailed their master out of the house. The small kid nodded and said, "Fu, watch out for your sister." The small girl ran up to him and hugged him after appearing to be torn. "Bye, uncle, I'll miss you." With tears streaming from his eyes, Inoichi knelt to give the girl a gentle hug while caressing her hair. "Riha-chan." Fu gasped as the scene abruptly changed and he was once again in Naruto's torture chamber. A hand smashed his throat before he had a chance to catch his breath. Lightning flared all around Naruto, his form trembling with rage. His regular eye turned icy, and his Sharingan burned brightly. Riha is your fucking sister." Fu remained silent. Instead, he was unable to do so since the lack of oxygen was causing his face to grow purple. Before Naruto relinquished his hold, he wasn't sure if his neck would shatter or if he would pass out. His body sank onto the chair as he heaved, drawing in the much-needed oxygen. Naruto muttered to himself as he walked the room. What he had just witnessed was unbelievable. Riha. He had assumed the blonde was a gift from Kami, but she was actually the sister of a fucking root agent. He tugged at his hair, wondering why he had missed the warning signs. His body rested on a wall for stability. For as long as he had his team, they had been together. He calculated that they had been dating for almost 6 months. How in the world could he have missed any indications? Not even his ninja hounds had detected any negative energy from her. She was the woman he had always desired and a blessing in his life. Everyone liked her, including his team, friends, and hounds. She was flawless. Examine what's underlying. Naruto's eyes grew wide, and then he started shaking so violently that Fu assumed the blonde was having a seizure. Naruto let out a roar and struck the wall with such force that his fist penetrated the concrete. His body appeared to sag, devoid of all vitality, and his head pounded against the wall. She was flawless, absolutely flawless. Examine the underbelly. He was unwilling to. He disregarded everything, even if he saw it, in order to finally overcome the loneliness that had afflicted him for so long. He struck the wall with his head. It was enough to pain his head, but not so much that he would dispel. Not only that, though. Danzo was aware of the Kyuubi assault, and prepared for his dad's passing. With someone in charge of the Kyuubi. His anger forced his body to tremble so badly that he almost threw himself. Fu gasped as he was pinned by dual-colored eyes that were so full of murderous intent that he almost choked. Naruto approached the man and said, "All right, forget taking my time. I need you to start talking. Now." He flexed his fingers and then raised his thumb and index finger. On every digit, a blue stream materialized, illuminating the otherwise black space. Fu tried to bite off his own tongue as soon as he realized what he was going to do, but a hand touched his forehead and a seal materialized. He was paralyzed when his body disregarded his orders. Naruto cocked his head back and forced his mouth open. Grasping the man's tongue, he extended the muscle while concentrating on the little seal that appeared. The cursed seal Danzo had put was being burned away by the two flame fingers pressing against Fu's tongue, and all he could do was scream. His eyes burned with an unusual dampness despite his lack of emotion, and as Naruto concentrated more chakra on his fingers, the agonizing pain intensified and the flames grew larger, illuminating the darkness in a dazzling light. From the back of his throat, Fu let out a scream. After what seemed like an eternity, Naruto retracted his digits and stopped the chakra flow to his fingers, causing the pain to lessen. He let the man's head fall lifelessly to his side after removing the hand that was holding it. With tears streaming down his eyes and his mouth steaming, the root agent was left heaving. Before wiping his hands, Naruto flexed his fingers to let the hot digits cool. The man was too preoccupied with heaving in agony to pay attention to what Naruto was saying. "Right, I need you to focus on me, Fu." Slick. Fu's scream echoed through the surrounding walls as he lurched violently and stretched his back as far as the chair would let. The kunai buried to the hilt in his knee was the focus of his heaving figure. The knife was so deep that it cut right through the cartilage and bone that protruded from the other side of his knee pit. Ignoring the man's scream, Naruto tightened his hold on the handle, allowing the blade to glide farther. When he saw the man flailing around, he gave him a hard slap. When he jammed the knife down and pointed to his face, Fu's watery eyes finally turned to him. Focus. Hey, I need you focus right here, he said. Good. He scowled at the man and lifted himself to his maximum height, leaving the knife stuck in him. He gestured to the walls and said, I only have enough chakra to sustain me for a few hours. Roughly 9 to be exact. But like I mentioned, because of those seals, in here is my very own Tsukiyomi. Fu's shattered gaze shifted to the walls, where he noticed the ethereal radiance of intricate seal patterns. Each one of those 8 seals alter the perception of time, by about give or take 7 or 8 hours. He left. He brought energy to his eye, the seals flashing at the enormous levels of chakra, and asked rhetorically, you can do the math. Now let's see how long it takes before your mind breaks. As Naruto entered the recesses of his consciousness, Fu let out a scream.
I will continue this series in next part. Till then, bye bye.